The night that didn't go as planned. The cottage is whole and silent. The wards hum, the autumn wind presses at the windows, and somewhere far beyond Godric's Hollow, a serpent-eyed wizard prowls through shadows that refuse to open. Halloween, 1981, arrives on schedule, and nothing explodes. What if the most fixed night in Harry Potter canon did not happen the way we think it did? What if the Fidelius charm actually held, unbroken, unbetrayed, while Voldemort searched and never found the Potters at all? No green light, no shattered crib, no screaming infant marked as something extraordinary, just a hidden house, a sleeping baby, and a war that refuses to end neatly. In canon, we know this night almost by heart. Peter Pettigrew, the friend no one suspected, gives up James and Lily's location. Voldemort walks into Godric's Hollow. James falls in the hall without his wand. Lily stands over her son and chooses love over life, and that sacrificial magic turns the killing curse back on the Dark Lord. The boy who lived is born in a single blinding flash, and the wizarding world reshapes itself around a myth. But we're exploring something far more fragile and far more dangerous: the moment that betrayal never happens. Picture Peter alone in some damp London room, clutching the secret that makes him valuable, listening to distant screams that are not yet his friends. He is terrified of Voldemort, yes, but also of James's laugh, of Lily's trust, of Sirius's hand on his shoulder. Tonight, instead of walking to the Dark Lord, he freezes, or lies, or sends Voldemort in circles with a false lead that keeps the cottage invisible and the prophecy unresolved. This isn't a story about a miracle baby defeating the Dark Lord by accident. This is a story about what happens when the boy who lived never becomes a legend at all, when Harry grows up with parents who tuck him in instead of portraits who watch him from a wall. Most importantly, it's about how one coward, choosing loyalty for once, doesn't end the war, but twists it, because the prophecy matters. In canon, it only fully ignites when Voldemort marks his equal and turns Harry into his rival. If Voldemort never reaches that crib, if no curse rebounds, does Harry still become the chosen one? Or does destiny slide sideways, toward another child in another nursery, perhaps a baby named Neville Longbottom, whose parents are also defying the Dark Lord 3 times? We'll examine that controversy throughout this series, but for now, stay in this quiet house. James and Lily sleep. Sirius rides his motorbike through a sky that has not yet broken. Remus sits alone, not yet accused, not yet abandoned. The Marauder's bond still exists, hairline fractures hidden in the dark, and outside, denied his prize, Voldemort turns. If he cannot find the Potters tonight, someone else will pay the price. The question is no longer, how did he fall, but who falls instead? Rewriting the betrayal, Peter's one different choice. So what if the night we all know by heart never actually happens? What if the flash of green never touches that little house in Godric's Hollow because one scared, ordinary man makes one different choice? To believe that, we have to start with Canon Peter. This isn't a story about secretly hidden courage. This is a story about a boy who grew up in the long shadow of brilliance, James's effortless charm, Sirius's reckless magnetism, Remus's quiet intellect, learning that the only power he had was proximity. He is fear-driven. He hoards approval like oxygen. He laughs too loudly at other people's jokes because being liked feels like survival, and survival is the only thing he has ever believed he deserves. When Voldemort rises, that psychology doesn't disappear. It intensifies. Of course, Peter is drawn to the Dark Lord. Here is a new sun to orbit, a new source of protection. Betrayal, in canon, is simply his fear weaponized. But what if something interrupts that trajectory at the last possible moment? What if, before he passes the secret, he has to sit at Lily's kitchen table while Harry sleeps upstairs and listen to her say quietly, "We trust you, Peter. James always has. I always will." We're exploring the moment when that word, always, lands like a spell more binding than the dark mark. Maybe James claps him on the shoulder, calls him the bravest of us for taking on the Fidelius. Maybe Remus, haunted and tired, still makes time to send him a letter saying, "Whatever happens, we stand together." For a man who believes he is fundamentally disposable, that kind of love is dangerous. It makes betrayal feel like self-annihilation, so he stalls. He feeds Voldemort almost true information, the general area, the timing of their movements, the fact that they are under the Fidelius, but not where. He lets the Dark Lord believe the final revelation is imminent, that the pressure will crack him any day now. At the same time, he goes, shaking, sweating, to Dumbledore with a half-confession. Not, "I have been meeting with Voldemort," But he's closer than you think. Change the protections. Don't tell anyone it was me. Here, the mechanics matter. Under the Fidelius charm, the Potter's location is literally unknowable unless the Secret Keeper speaks. No amount of power lets Voldemort brute force that secret. If Peter does not actually reveal it, the house remains invisible, impenetrable, perfectly hidden. Most importantly, Voldemort's hunt becomes frantic rather than precise. He scours Godric's Hollow. He tears through safe houses. He turns his gaze toward the Longbottoms, toward any child who might fit a half-heard prophecy. Notice how the war's risk calculus shifts. If Peter betrays, Voldemort gains a quick, surgical victory. Prophecy child targeted, parents dead. The legend of the boy who lived, born by accident. If Peter does not, Voldemort is forced into broader, sloppier strategies. Raids, mass terror, public displays of power that expose his followers and strain his resources. The tempo of the war accelerates, but it also destabilizes. Underneath all of this, the real weapon isn't a spell at all. It's the romantic undercurrent of friendship. The Marauders' bond, Lily and James's unguarded trust, the memory of 4 boys mapping a castle together because the world felt conquerable. That is something more profound than Peter's fear. It doesn't redeem him, it just makes surrendering them feel like killing the only version of himself that was ever extraordinary. So he lies to Voldemort about how close he is to breaking, to Dumbledore about how deep he's already sunk. The clock keeps ticking. And the question that hangs over this altered timeline is simple, terrible, and something worth fighting for. Who uncovers the deception first? The Dark Lord who does not forgive failure, or the Headmaster who does not forgive threats to his war? A war without a miracle, Voldemort's new strategy. So when the lies harden into habit, the war itself shifts. Because what if the Dark Lord who once pinned everything on a single night in Godric's Hollow is forced to live without his miracle? No crib, no scar, no triumphant fall, just a prophecy that hangs unfinished in the air and a child he cannot reach. Voldemort understands enough to be afraid. He knows a child born as July dies is marked as his equal. He knows the Potters are central, protected by a Fidelius charm so perfect, it feels like mockery. And so, in a mind that has always equated love with weakness and control with survival, the answer is simple and terrible. If he cannot strike the heart, he will strangle the veins. This isn't a story about one catastrophic visit to Godric's Hollow. This is a story about a strategic pivot, about a wizard who refuses to let fate outmaneuver him twice. We're exploring a Voldemort who looks at the map of the war and redraws every line. No more waiting for a perfect opening, no more obsession with a single address. Instead, he turns his fury on the world that dares to hide James and Lily. Order safe houses are hit first. Places that in canon survived long enough to feel almost secure are now turned inside out. Bones on kitchen tiles, scorch marks where Patronuses once shone. Ministry departments that drag their feet on anti-Death Eater legislation wake up to disappearances in their own corridors. An Auror here, a clerk there, a Muggle-born records witch who simply does not arrive for work. It's not random, it's a message. If he cannot kill the child, he will break the world around him. Death Eater operations become relentless. Raids are no longer about terror alone. They are about information, about smoking out any whisper of Potter, any hint of a hidden cottage, or a baby who cries at thunder. Families who once toasted James at their wedding now find their homes marked, their memories ripped apart under legilimency. We'll examine how that paranoia runs both ways. The Order suspects leaks where there are none. The Ministry suspects the order of provoking attacks, and in the middle of it all, the Potters remain an absence that hurts like a wound. Most importantly, there is no clean break in power, no boy who lived headline. The compromised Ministry staggers on, reactive instead of victorious, issuing hollow decrees while Death Eaters sit in quiet, polished offices and write the policies that will later justify their crimes. And the prophecy, without that cannon lightning strike in Godric's Hollow, it festers. Voldemort, terrified of an equal he cannot name, starts hunting possibilities. Every July-born child in certain circles is scrutinized. Some are threatened, some vanish. He creates a generation of almost chosen ones, children whose only crime is sharing a date with destiny. The war becomes a slow-burn nightmare instead of a single night of legend. For the Order, hope is not a baby who survived the impossible, it is endurance, the decision to keep fighting when there is no symbol, only losses. For James and Lily, love is exile, the knowledge that every day they stay hidden, someone else might die in their place. And when Voldemort finally accepts that he cannot yet reach Harry Potter, he adjusts once more. If he cannot touch the boy, he will touch the boy's future. He will hunt the people Harry would have loved: Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, the old school friends who still raise a glass to the Marauders, and anyone foolish or brave enough to keep the name Potter in public. The next phase of the war begins not with a prophecy fulfilled, but with a list of names. The Marauders, Unbroken, Sirius, Remus, and a living James. The list of names is written in blood and memory. At the top are the ones who never broke. The ones who, in this timeline, still stand together. What if the Marauders never shattered? What if instead of grief and prison and 12 years of silence, we're exploring a world where James and Lily are hidden, but alive? Sirius is free, Remus is trusted, and Peter Pettigrew is still at the table, hands shaking, eyes darting, but there. The same four boys who once prowled Hogwarts corridors now prowl a war. Their dynamic reforms almost effortlessly, and yet with something more profound layered over the old mischief. James is no longer just the golden Quidditch star. He is a young father under Fidelius, pacing cramped rooms in Godric's Hollow, one always within reach, listening for the crack of apparition that might mean news or death. He jokes, he plays with baby Harry, he charms dishes to wash themselves, but every laugh is edged with guilt. Others bleed so that his son can sleep through the night. Sirius refuses to sleep much at all. Without Azkaban, his brilliance has somewhere to burn. He becomes the Order's reckless field operative, the one who volunteers first and questions later, who apparates behind enemy lines with that wild grin and a plan that sounds like a dare. In dog form, he slips through barred windows and beneath meeting room tables, eavesdropping on Death Eater strategy, memorizing passwords, bringing back names and dates, and the smell of dark magic on his fur. He lives for the moment he can drop the glamour, slam his findings onto the kitchen table, and say, "Here, now we hit them." Remus, by contrast, is quiet, deliberate, always aware that one wrong move could cost him the fragile trust he's finally been granted. Werewolf prejudice hasn't vanished. The Ministry still files his name under dangerous creature rather than valuable ally, but with James and Lily alive to advocate, with Dumbledore listening when James says, "You don't know him like we do," Remus is pulled into the heart of the Order instead of kept at its edges. He becomes the strategist, the one mapping patterns in attacks, predicting where Voldemort will strike next, asking the questions others are too tired or too proud to ask. Most importantly, he is the moral compass when the war tempts them toward cruelty. And Peter, canon told us he was always a traitor waiting to happen. Here, we'll examine the possibility that fear does not immediately calcify into betrayal. He is still fragile, still sweating at briefings, still jumping at every knock on the door, but surrounded by friends who never turned their backs, by James who claps his shoulder, by Sirius who teases him into laughter, he clings to the bond that once made him feel extraordinary. For now, he chooses love over terror. This isn't a story about a boy growing up alone in a cupboard. This is a story about a child raised in the eye of the storm, passed from one set of arms to another. James's playful tosses, Lily's fierce embraces, Sirius's dizzying spins, Remus's careful book-scented hugs. Harry grows up hearing war reports between bedtime stories, learning that courage is what you do when you're scared, because he watches the adults he adores walk out the door night after night. With the Marauders intact, the Order of the Phoenix is less a loose alliance and more a living organism. Information flows through them cleanly. Sirius brings intelligence, Remus turns it into plans, James pressure tests those plans from the perspective of the hidden, and Lily, brilliant underused in canon, wards and rewrites, and improves the magic that keeps them all alive. There are fewer fractures for Voldemort to exploit, fewer whispered doubts about spies when everyone has seen, again and again, these four men return together. But strength draws attention. The more successful their raids, the more Death Eaters who vanish or defect, the more Voldemort's gaze narrows. He starts hearing one name in particular in the mouths of his followers, Potter, not as martyr, as problem. And if the Dark Lord cannot reach the child, he will reach for the circle around him. So we end this moment in a borrowed kitchen, maps spread, wands lit, Harry asleep upstairs while his uncles and parents argue in urgent whispers about the next mission. They are winning, for now. They are together, for now. And the stronger that unity becomes, the more devastating it will be when, whether by prophecy, by fear, or by one trembling choice, that unity finally breaks. Harry Potter, child of a war that never ended. Harry's childhood begins in that same borrowed kitchen and never really leaves it. The map on the table changes, the wards thicken, the hiding places rotate, but the pattern holds. Low voices, drawn curtains, the faint shimmer of a Fidelius charm in the air, like static on the skin. What if the boy who lived never lived in a cupboard, but in a safe house that feels, to a child, both fortress and cage? The rooms are cramped. Toys share space with trunk lids that never quite close, with spare cloaks, with emergency port keys coiled like sleeping snakes on the mantle. Protective spells hum in the walls. Harry grows up knowing the difference between a shield charm and a silencing charm before he can properly read. Bedtime is a ritual of layered locks and whispered counter curses, followed by stories that are half fairy tale, half tactical briefing. Dragons and giants, yes, but also escape routes and code phrases, the way you always keep your wand where you can reach it. This isn't a story about neglect. Canon gives us a boy starved of touch, of praise, of any sense that he is wanted. Here, he is wanted almost too much. James turns the living room into a Quidditch pitch with a flick of his wrist, reckless and laughing, transfiguring cushions into bludgers until Lily threatens to hex him and Sirius eggs him on. Lily checks every window twice, then a third time, her love a fierce, almost painful shield that wraps around Harry and squeezes. Sirius sneaks him chocolate frogs, teaches him how to ride a broom far earlier than is sensible. Remus, quieter, corrects his wand grip, answers the questions the others dodge, and reads him stories where the clever, careful hero survives by paying attention. Growing up in that crucible shapes him. He isn't desperate for any adult's approval. He has too much of it, if anything, pressed on him from all sides. But he is intimately familiar with sacrifice. Missions postponed because Harry has a fever. Plans altered because the safe house is compromised and moving him is too risky. He hears the word prophecy in the next room long before anyone explains it. He notices that every conversation about the ministry ends in a sigh, that Dumbledore's name is spoken with respect, but never unquestioned trust. Institutions, to this Harry, are not saviors. They are chessboards adults argue over while he learns to duck, and as he watches, he learns something more profound about love. James and Lily fight in these narrow rooms, about assignments, about Dumbledore, about whether Harry should ever pick up a wand in anger. Doors slam, voices rise, but so do reconciliations. Apologies murmured over shared tea, Lily's hand in James's hair, his head bowed against her shoulder after a mission goes wrong. For Harry, romance is not a distant fairy tale. It is the sight of his parents choosing each other, again and again, when fear could have driven them apart. That bond becomes his first and deepest template. Love as argument, as alliance, as something worth fighting for. What about the prophecy itself? Here, we're exploring a different kind of burden. They do not tell him everything at once. At 5, he is simply special. At 7, in danger. By 9, he knows the words, "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord," recited not as a destiny, but as a reason they cannot ever relax. Lily frames it as possibility, James as challenge, Sirius as unfair, Remus as a call to be careful. Harry absorbs all of it. He does not grow up thinking he is chosen by fate in some abstract heroic sense. He grows up knowing that Voldemort has a personal, ongoing reason to hunt his family, and that his existence is one of the variables in every plan. Most importantly, magic is never a revelation. There is no letter crashing through the fireplace to tell him who he is. He has always known. The real unknown is freedom. He learns to cast Lumos under the table, while adults debate whether he will ever walk Diagon Alley in daylight. He practices basic dueling forms with Remus, not as a game, but as insurance. When he hears about Hogwarts, it isn't as a promise, it's as a question with knives hidden in it. So as he approaches 11, the classic canon question dissolves. This isn't a story about a boy discovering magic. This is a story about a boy who has never known anything but magic, and yet has never known a world where he isn't hiding. The letters will still come, the train will still whistle, but the real tension is different now. Will James and Lily, who have built their lives around keeping him unseen, actually let him step out of the shadows? Or will the war that never ended reach out its hand and pull him back, just as the doors of Hogwarts finally open? The prophecy, without a legend. Is Harry still the chosen one? The letters will still come. The train will still whistle. But before Harry ever sets foot on that platform, there is something older than Hogwarts itself hanging over his life. A sentence spoken in a dark room before he could even breathe. Born as the 7th month dies, power the Dark Lord knows not. and either must die at the hand of the other. Stripped of legend, the prophecy is almost clinical, an equation of birth date, hidden potential, and inevitable confrontation. In canon, we meet it already bloodied by history, already attached to a scar and a headline. Here, we're exploring what happens when the words exist without the myth. No boy who lived, no nursery massacre. Just a chilling prediction filed away in Dumbledore's memory and the Department of Mysteries. How do prophecies actually work in this universe? They are not chains, they are crossroads. They sit dormant until someone hears them, fears them, acts on them. In canon, Voldemort's choice to strike the Potters is what ignites the whole thing. What if that choice keeps failing because he never finds them? We'll examine how prophecies tend to become self-fulfilling. They are misread, weaponized, twisted by the people most terrified of their implications. The danger is rarely the words themselves. The danger is what people do because of them. Dumbledore, in this timeline, has no comforting narrative of a fallen Dark Lord or a miraculous infant survivor. There is no past victory to lean on. For him, the prophecy is not a closed chapter, but a ticking risk. So he watches Harry not as a symbol, but as a potential flashpoint. He counsels James and Lily to keep their son hidden, to delay fame, to delay temptation. This isn't a story about grooming a hero. This is a story about an old man trying, perhaps too hard, to keep a child from ever needing to be one. Voldemort, meanwhile, cannot let it go. He was denied his chance to strike once. That denial festers. Without a clear boy who lived, his paranoia widens. Every July-born child in a Resistance family becomes suspect. The Longbottoms, the Boneses, unknown half-bloods and purebloods alike. Imagine raids that are not precise, but sweeping, not myth-making, but quietly, efficiently cruel. He is still trying to find the child who could be his equal, and in doing so, he might be creating them. So if Harry never becomes the boy who lived, is he still the chosen one? Or does that mantle drift toward Neville, whose parents are also prominent Aurors, also potential targets, also raising a July-born son under siege? Most importantly, is Chosen One even a fixed role, or just a label we slap on whoever survives long enough to stand opposite Voldemort at the end? Without a public legend, the prophecy becomes a private burden. James and Lily argue about it in their kitchen at midnight. Sirius wants to burn the record. Remus wants to analyze every word. Harry grows up sensing there is something unspoken in every adult's silence. No newspaper prints his name, but in living rooms and order meetings, his future is dissected like a battle plan. And here's the uncomfortable question. By keeping him alive and hidden, by refusing to let fate mark anyone else, do his parents actually ensure that he must one day face Voldemort directly? What if, in trying to outrun destiny, they are slowly, lovingly, building the only person who can't escape it? Because the prophecy is still out there, the Dark Lord is still listening, and as Hogwarts beckons, the world is quietly arranging pieces on a board Harry doesn't even know he's standing on. Dumbledore's dilemma, protecting a living Potter family. Dumbledore can feel it long before Harry ever holds a wand. The world is closing in. In canon, he waits on a Privet Drive doorstep and leaves a baby with a letter, trusting in blood wards and distance. Here, he has to knock on a front door and look James and Lily Potter in the eye. No convenient orphan, no clean authority, just a prophecy, two brilliant, exhausted parents, and a child who laughs when his toy broom lifts off the carpet. We're exploring a Dumbledore who can't hide behind silence quite so easily. His old pattern with Harry, calculated distance, half-truths, the long game in which the boy is prepared, isolated, and finally sacrificed, is suddenly complicated by two adults who know him, who once fought beside him, who are not going to let their son become an abstract greater good. This isn't a story about a wise old man guiding an orphan. This is a story about a general trying to protect a family that refuses to be only a symbol. So the Potters vanish, but not into a single cottage frozen in time. Dumbledore builds a web, rotating safe houses passed between Order members, layered Fidelius charms, with the secret-keeping burden shared, rotated, cross-checked. Wards that bristle at the edge of detection spells, limited contact with the outside world, no Diagon Alley trips without disguises, no casual visits to old friends, and at the center of it all, Dumbledore as coordinator, strategist, gatekeeper. James hates it. Of course he does. In his mind, the prophecy doesn't make Harry a reason to hide. It makes James a weapon that ought to be on the field. He argues for raids, for leading missions with Sirius and Remus, for taking the fight directly to the Death Eaters. Dumbledore pushes back again and again. Every risk James takes is a risk to the prophecy's fulfillment, a chance that Voldemort kills the father before the son is ready. How much danger is acceptable when the fate of the wizarding world might rest on one family's survival? How much love can you protect if you never let it step outside? Lily becomes the fulcrum of this dilemma. Brilliant, principled, always a step ahead, she studies the prophecy's wording, the protections, the politics. Most importantly, she refuses to let Harry be framed as a necessary sacrifice, not Voldemort's weapon, not Dumbledore's shield. She negotiates every condition, what Harry is told when he is trained, who he trusts. She looks Dumbledore in the eye and quietly asks the question he least wants to answer. If it comes to it, will you ask my son to die? Without the boy who lived myth, Dumbledore's political leverage is weaker, almost fragile. There is no miraculous infant victory to rally behind, no scar as a living banner. The Ministry doesn't bend around a legend, it hedges around rumors. Publicly, Dumbledore has only a still-rising Voldemort and a war that never quite ended. Privately, he has a secret he can't reveal without painting a target on Harry's back, and as Harry nears Hogwarts' age, that secret becomes unbearable. What if the safest place for him is also the most public, most vulnerable space in the wizarding world? Does Dumbledore keep him hidden and half-trained, or send him to school and light a quiet beacon that Voldemort, one day, will see, because the letter to Hogwarts is coming, and Dumbledore, for once, can't have it both ways? Sirius Black, free man, the Godfather, Harry actually knows. So what does Hogwarts look like when the letter arrives for a boy who already has a bedtime story, a broom in the shed, and a godfather snoring on the sofa? We shift the camera just a little, and we find Sirius Black not as a name whispered in Azkaban, but as a shadow in doorways, a laugh in the kitchen, a wand always within reach. His 20s are not wasted years in a cell, they are burned away in covert missions, in alleys where curses flash blue and green, in safe houses where he comes home bleeding at 3 in the morning, and a tiny Harry wakes up, toddling across the floor to cling to his boots. What if Harry's first memory of Sirius isn't a wanted poster, but the smell of leather and smoke, and the dizzy rush of flying far too high, far too early? Sirius is a godfather in practice, not just in title. He is the one who slips Harry his first toy broom before Lily thinks he's ready, who teaches him the difference between a Ronsky feint and a broken neck with a grin that doesn't quite hide the fear. He sneaks in joke products from Zonko's, shows Harry how to charm a quill, to spit ink at James, and then, later, sits on the edge of Harry's bed and tells half-sanitized stories about detentions with McGonagall, about James's ridiculous courage, about Lily's brilliance that always saved them. But beneath the bravado, there is something more profound. Sirius is the boy who ran from a house of dark artifacts and blood purity, who chose love over lineage and paid for it with his name. In this timeline, he's not broken by Dementors, yet the war still haunts him. Every mission is a ledger in his mind. One more risk, one more night where he imagines James's body on the floor, or worse, Harry's. He laughs too loud at breakfast because he lay awake until dawn, quietly terrified that his recklessness will be the thing that finally gets them killed. We're exploring an emotional triangle that canon only hints at. James is father and hero, the center of gravity. Sirius becomes the chaotic older brother uncle, the one who lets Harry stay up past midnight to watch enchanted Quidditch replays, who teaches him dueling stances long before a professor ever will. They compete, playfully, intensely, to be Harry's favorite, to be his shield. Who does Harry run to after a nightmare, after overhearing the word prophecy in a room he was meant to avoid? The answer shifts, and that shifting matters. Remus is the quiet counterweight. He sees the way Sirius volunteers for the most dangerous assignments, the way he pushes his luck in duels as if daring the universe to take him instead of James. Remus is the one who steps between them in arguments, who catches Sirius's wrist before he storms out to fix everything alone, who reminds him that loyalty without caution is just another path to ruin. Most importantly, this isn't a story about a boy yearning for a family. This is a story about a boy who has a family, who has something worth fighting for, and therefore has everything to lose. Every prank, every flying lesson, every whispered tale of the Marauders becomes a thread binding Harry to a world that war is actively trying to tear apart. So when Dumbledore outlines a mission that will place an Order operative near Voldemort's inner circle, Sirius doesn't hesitate. If he can end this war, Harry can finally be free. Remus sees the crack in that logic. James hears the danger in the silence that follows. And Harry, listening from the stairs, feels the first cold edge of dread, because this time, when Sirius walks toward the darkness, Harry actually knows exactly what he stands to lose. Remus Lupin, strategist in the shadows. Remus is the one who moves first. While Sirius stalks toward the mission that might end the war, Remus steps sideways, into the shadows, into the spaces no one else in this story quite knows how to occupy. If Sirius is the blade, Remus is the map. And in this what if, the map matters just as much. By now, his role inside the Order has expanded far beyond the quiet, shabby professor we remember from canon. He is liaison to the werewolf packs that Voldemort is steadily poisoning with promises, to the giants driven to the margins, to squibs and half-bloods who feel the Ministry's disdain long before they ever feel a Death Eater's wand. He listens, he records, he brings back patterns and warnings, then spends long nights at Order headquarters, turning raw fear into intelligence reports. And when James and Lily are on edge, or on missions, or simply too exhausted to keep pretending they are not afraid, he is also part-time caretaker, the calm presence in the Potter living room. We're exploring a Harry who grows up knowing Remus not as a tragic guest star, but as the man who reads him to sleep. Quiet evenings with books become their ritual, Remus's voice threading through tales of Merlin and Morgana, Muggle astronomy, defensive theory that is technically far above Harry's age level, but never above his understanding. When Harry asks why people joined Voldemort, Remus does not lie. He explains hunger, humiliation, and the way cruelty can masquerade as safety. He is the first to tell Harry that fear and kindness can coexist in the same heart, that being afraid does not cancel out being brave. From his vantage point, the war looks different. As a werewolf, he watches Voldemort exploit the oppressed, turning every Ministry slight into a recruiting speech. As a marauder, he watches the Fidelius-protected cottage become a gilded cage, sees how isolation is slowly breaking James's laughter and sharpening Lily's temper. This isn't a story about simple good people hiding from simple evil. This is a story about people being slowly worn down by the very protection that keeps them alive. So Remus, the analyst, asks the question no one wants to touch. Is hiding Harry truly protecting him, or are they only delaying an inevitable confrontation while the world burns around their safe house? What happens if the prophecy doesn't wait politely at the doorstep? What if the boy, who might have been a symbol of hope, grows up watching that hope shrink to the size of 4 walls and a garden? Inside the Marauders, that question becomes a fault line. James is impatient, desperate to act, to fight, to stop feeling like a trapped stag pacing the same room. Sirius is bold, almost reckless, ready to trade his life today if it means Harry is free tomorrow. Remus is cautious, pragmatic, weighing every risk against the cost to the child who is listening at the stairs. Together, their late-night arguments turn strategy into something more profound, a debate about what they owe their son, their friend, their world, and through it all, Remus watches. He sees the way James and Lily's marriage bends, but does not break, how they pass Harry between them like a promise, how their love is both sanctuary and pressure cooker. He notices Harry's budding personality, the fierce questions, the stubborn streak, the instinct to stand between his friends and danger even in childish games. There is tenderness in that observation, and dread, because he can already see the outline of the boy the prophecy describes. So one evening, when Dumbledore visits and the house feels too small for all the secrets inside it, Remus finally voices the thought that has been haunting him. Maybe the safest place for Harry, and the most dangerous, is not this hidden cottage at all. Albus, he says quietly, what if the only place he can actually learn to survive this is Hogwarts? A wizarding world, without the boy who lived the world. That question opens up is not the bright, cathartic one we know from canon. There is no Halloween where everything ends in a flash of green light and legend. There is no boy who lived. There is only a war that never quite stops. In canon, Voldemort's fall creates a clean narrative for people to cling to. A monster destroyed by his own curse, a baby with a scar, a prophecy apparently fulfilled. The Ministry seizes that moment, wraps it in medals and headlines, and tells everyone the same comforting story. It's over, you're safe, you can go back to work. In this timeline, that moment never comes. hums. There is no ruined cottage in Godric's Hollow, no Dark Lord vanished into myth, just a series of attacks that slow, then shift, then return, like a storm that keeps changing direction but never blows itself out. So what does a ministry look like when it never gets its victory parade? Compromised, defensive, always negotiating with its own fear. We're exploring a government that passes stern anti-Death Eater decrees in public, while in private, senior officials whisper about pragmatic arrangements and limited amnesties. Some Death Eaters are arrested, yes, but others quietly avoid Azkaban through bribes, blackmail, or blood connections. Trials drag on, evidence disappears, and every time Dumbledore presses for real accountability, the minister's smile gets a little tighter. Public morale doesn't soar, it frays. There is no lightning-scarred savior to put on the front page, only rumors of a hidden child and a prophecy that no one can quote in full. People ask, in hushed voices in Diagon Alley, whether the Potters are dead, or cowards, or something more extraordinary. Did Dumbledore hide them? Did they run? Is there actually a chosen one at all? Or was it all just one more story adults tell to make fear sound meaningful? Voldemort exploits that uncertainty with surgical precision. His followers spread pamphlets and whispers, painting the Order of the Phoenix as reckless vigilantes, terrorists, disrupting the peace. The Potters become his favorite example, privileged blood traders in hiding, too afraid to face the future. He casts himself as that future, order through power, purity through control, an inevitable correction to a world that has grown weak. When chaos meets rhetoric, when fear meets a promise of strength, when tired parents hear, again and again, that resistance only prolongs the war, some start to listen, and their children grow up in this. For them, curfews and disappearances are normal. Blood status rhetoric tightens at some dinner tables, little lessons about who is safe to befriend, who is appropriate to marry. This isn't a story about a single shocking trauma. This is a story about a generation shaped by a constant, low, humming dread that never quite leaves the room. Hogwarts, in that world, cannot remain untouched. It is less sanctuary, more contested ground. Governors demand stricter oversight. The board questions every hiring decision, every curriculum change. Some staff push for open resistance, others argue for neutrality, for survival. Students bring their parents' politics into the corridors. Slytherin common room debates that are not debates at all. Hufflepuff friendships strained. Gryffindor and Ravenclaw alliances forming around whose parents trust Dumbledore and whose secretly support the Ministry's appeasement. Dumbledore stands at the center of it, brilliant and besieged. He is still the greatest wizard of his age, but he is also a political liability, accused of escalating tensions. Every time the Order strikes back, there are whispers of replacing him. There are motions, delayed but never withdrawn. And in that atmosphere of half-truths, quiet deals, and children learning to measure their words before they speak, Remus's question becomes something more profound. If Hogwarts is no longer simply a school, but the heart of the struggle over what the wizarding world will become, then sending Harry Potter there is not just risky, it is an act of open defiance. It is a declaration that the hidden child of the prophecy will finally step into the story. The only question is, whose story will Hogwarts let him write? The decision. Do the Potters let Harry go to Hogwarts? The house is too quiet for a house that has just received a Hogwarts letter. Harry knows that before he even hears the first raised voice. He stands on the landing, hand hovering over the banister, listening as the people who love him most decide what his life is allowed to be. And this is where our what if turns from strategic theory into something more profound. Not just who Voldemort targets, not just which prophecy line activates, but whether Harry Potter is permitted to be a child at all. Downstairs, James is the first to break. He has to go, Lily. It's Hogwarts. It's where we learn to fight, where we learn to live. We can't keep him under the Fidelius forever. That's not protection. That's a prison. His voice is raw, edged with a fear he almost never lets Harry see. Lily fires back. A prison? James, you know what Hogwarts is now. Half the board still thinks Voldemort had a point. There are Death Eater sympathizers in the staff room. The Ministry is crawling over Dumbledore's every decision. You want to put a bullseye on our son and send him into that? On the stairs, Harry goes very still. Bullseye, target. The words land harder than any hex. He had always known, in the abstract, that Voldemort wanted him. He had not understood that adults in London meeting rooms said his name like a political slogan. Sirius cuts in, pacing. And if we don't? His laugh is short, bitter. If we keep him hidden until he's 17, what then? We hand him a wand and say, "Surprise, kid, you're the chosen one? Good luck?" If we let fear write his story, Voldemort has already won. Remus, as always, tries to translate emotion into strategy. "There are concrete risks," he says quietly. "Lucius Malfoy sits on the governors. The Ministry would love to observe Harry in the name of security, and if Voldemort suspects Hogwarts is where the Potters finally step into the open, he could see the castle as bait. For Harry, for Dumbledore, for all of us." Dumbledore's voice, when it comes, is softer than canon ever allowed it to be. "This isn't a story about using a boy as a weapon," he says, and we can hear the weight of every half-truth he told in another timeline. "This is a story about whether we trust that boy to grow into his own choices. Hogwarts is dangerous, so is ignorance, so is isolation. Most importantly, he does not pretend neutrality. If Harry comes, I will fight for his safety with everything I have. But I will also expect him to learn why this war began, and what kind of wizard he wishes to be within it." On the landing, Harry's heart hammers. He is not just a boy, he is a symbol, a secret, a possible endgame, something worth fighting for, and, terrifyingly, something people might fight over. James's voice cracks. "I believe in you, Albus. I believe in Hogwarts. I don't know if I can watch my son walk into open defiance." Lily's reply is a whisper sharpened to a blade. "And I don't know if I can watch him fade behind these walls, never learning who he is without a war." Silence. Then chairs scrape, wands clink against wood, a decision settles like a storm breaking. We cut away before we hear it. Because the next time we see Harry, the Scarlet Boy, who was never canon's boy who lived, he is standing on platform 9 3/4 on September 1st, staring up at the Scarlet steam engine that will carry him, and the entire wizarding world, into a very different Hogwarts story. Platform 9 3/4, a very different first departure. Steam billows like dragon breath, swallowing the vaulted ceiling of King's Cross, and for a heartbeat it feels as if the whole platform is holding its breath with Harry, not for the boy who lived, for the boy who lived hidden. Layered over the muggle bustle, there are wards so dense they hum against his skin. Detection webs, anti-apparition nets, quiet anti-curse veils stitched together by Dumbledore himself and reinforced by an entire department of magical law enforcement that never got to celebrate Voldemort's fall. We're exploring a platform 9 3/4 that has always been a front line, not a nostalgic backdrop. James walks at Harry's left, Lily at his right, the three of them slipping through the barrier as if through the surface of a pensieve. On the other side, the Scarlet engine waits, but so do eyes, so do wands. Moody leans against a pillar in plain sight, magical eye ticking. Two aurors in nondescript cloaks pace the edge of the platform. And on a bench near the far end, Albus Dumbledore pretends to read a muggle newspaper, his presence as subtle as a drawn wand. In canon, Harry arrived anonymous, a lost boy with a trolley, and no idea how to find the platform. Here, people actually know the name Potter. Some recognize the messy hair and Lily's eyes, and go still, whispering behind gloved hands. Others glance once at James's face, at the man who refused to join Voldemort and then vanished under Fidelius, and turn away with tight mouths, as if proximity itself is dangerous. What if your first taste of freedom came with the realization that you are already a symbol in a war you did not choose? Harry feels exhilaration first, the sheer extraordinary sight of the train, the rush of noise, the knowledge that he is finally going to Hogwarts like every story he has ever begged Sirius to repeat. But threaded through it is something sharper. Every stare is a question. Every whisper is a reminder that his name carries weight he never asked for. He nearly crashes his trolley into a lanky red-haired boy whose trunk is half open. Ron Weasley mutters an apology, then freezes as he clocks James and Lily and the way two aurors subtly adjust position. There is awe there, yes, but also a flicker of wariness learned from parents who remember the first rise of Voldemort and know that the Potters attract trouble. Hermione Granger appears in a blur of frizz and overstuffed book bag, parents in tow, cataloging everything with wide, analytical eyes. In canon, she meets a legend on the train. Here, she watches the way Harry's shoulders tense under scrutiny, the way Lily's hand lingers at his back, and files away a different truth. This isn't a story about glory, this is a story about pressure. Near the barrier, Lucius Malfoy stands immaculate, one hand resting lightly on Draco's shoulder, the other curled around his cane. He does not approach. He simply observes as Draco studies Harry with open curiosity, already measuring lineage, power, potential alliances. When their gazes meet, it is not instant hatred. It is calculation on one side, wary confusion on the other, the first spark of a dynamic that might become rivalry, or something more complicated. Most importantly, the goodbye is not perfunctory. Lily crushes Harry to her, fingers fisting in his robes as if the Fidelius could fail at any second. James tries for lightness. Send us an owl if the food's terrible. We'll stage a rescue. But his joke lands like a shield charm, flimsy over real fear. Sirius, allowed this brief, risky appearance under layers of glamours, pulls Harry close, breath warm at his ear, as he whispers a warning shaped by a decade of underground war. Trust your instincts, trust your friends, and never forget that your choices are something worth fighting for. The whistle screams. Doors slam. As the train lurches forward, Harry leans out of the window, watching his parents blur into smoke and color, feeling both untethered and finally, terrifyingly free. Then it hits him. Not just the press of students peering into his compartment, not just the curious, hungry looks from children who have heard half-truths about the hidden Potters. There is a different gaze, cool and focused, brushing over him like the edge of a drawn blade. From the far end of the platform, past Dumbledore's folded paper and Lucius's composed profile, someone watches Harry with very specific interest, not in the Potters as a symbol, in Harry himself, as if he is a missing variable in a prophecy that never quite resolved. And as the station falls away, Harry cannot shake the feeling that whatever that person wants from him will change Hogwarts forever. Sorting a Potter, the world hasn't decided on yet. The Great Hall is bright and beautiful, but it feels like a war room. Candles float, stars glitter on the enchanted ceiling, plates gleam, but the silence before McGonagall unrolls her parchment is sharper, more calculating than in canon. Rumors have already run ahead of the boats. Somewhere among the wide-eyed first years is Harry Potter, son of James and Lily, raised in safe houses and strategy meetings, a child whose bedtime stories were contingency plans, and everyone, from the Slytherin table to the staff dais, is wondering the same thing. Where do you put a Potter when the war never ended? When the hat drops over his eyes, the hall falls away. It's not just darkness, it's memory. Cold stone in a French safe house, Sirius laughing too loudly to hide the way he checks the wards, Remus's low voice reading theory texts because Harry asked one too many questions about Fidelius and prophecy, Lily's hands shaking as she teaches him his first shield charm, then smoothing his hair and saying, "You're allowed to be a child, Harry, even now." The hat hums, amused and a little alarmed. Bravery, certainly. You walk toward danger because you think it's your job. That's Gryffindor. Harry thinks of James and Lily dueling in cramped kitchens, of order meetings that pause when he enters. He wants to be like them. He also wants to stop waking up to the sound of his mother arguing with Dumbledore about acceptable levels of risk for an 11-year-old. Cunning too, the hat presses, voice turning silkier. You read a room, you count exits. You've learned to lie with your eyes open. Survival, strategy, the patience to wait in the shadows. Slytherin would make you powerful. And here the war context twists the choice. Slytherin is not just ambition, it is the house of marked parents, of Malfoy whispers, and children who have already seen dark marks over their manners. To sit there would mean proximity to heirs whose fathers hunt his family. It would mean being a spy before he has finished growing. Ravenclaw tugs at him through gentler threads. Remus's influence, the love of questions for their own sake, the way Harry lights up over obscure defensive theory. You could have peace there, the hat suggests. Books and quiet, and people who care what you think. But even that peace is political now. A Potter who retreats into the library sends a message that the symbol of resistance has chosen neutrality. What if the Sorting Hat isn't just assigning a house, but asking Harry to pick a version of himself? This isn't a story about colors on a scarf. This is a story about identity as a battlefield, about a boy deciding whether he will be weapon, witness, or something more profound. Most importantly, Harry hesitates. I don't want to be a weapon, he thinks, and the hat hears the echo of Lily's fear, James's defiance, Dumbledore's careful plans. But I can't pretend there isn't a war. In this timeline, that tension tips the scales, not toward Slytherin's lethal proximity, not toward Ravenclaw's tempting retreat, but toward the house that names the conflict honestly, courage in the open, fear acknowledged and faced. Very well, the hat decides, almost gently, better be Gryffindor. The hall erupts, but underneath the cheers is a crackle of rearranged strategies. A Potter in Gryffindor means the red and gold table becomes a front line, not just a home. It means open opposition, visible defiance, a symbol planted where everyone can see. And as Harry slides onto the bench, heart pounding, someone at the staff table is already planning how to shield him from that symbolism, while, a few seats away, someone else is calculating exactly how to turn it into leverage. Hermione Granger meets a very different Harry Potter. Hermione Granger arrives at Hogwarts with a timetable color-coded to the minute and a heart full of relief that finally there is a place where too much reading might actually be an asset, but from the very first feast, she can tell this is not the safe, whimsical school she imagined. The candles flicker over whispered headlines about raids. Aurors stand at the doors like sentries. House tables feel less like cozy communities and more like fault lines. She's still the Hermione we know from canon, Muggle-born, brilliant, over-prepared, armed with facts about the Fidelius charm and the First War that no one asked her to memorize. Yet, in this timeline, those facts are not just interesting, they're survival manuals. When she raises her hand to define prophecy activation in History of Magic, the air in the room tightens, because that phrase is not theoretical here, it's happening outside these walls. So when she hears the name Harry Potter and sees the way the Great Hall reacts, she is ready for something, a peacock, a celebrity, maybe even a clueless boy who doesn't know he's famous. That's the story she built in her head, from books and stray Daily Prophet articles. But what if the first real glimpse she gets is of a thin boy at the Gryffindor table who flinches when a plate shatters, whose eyes instantly track the nearest exit before he relaxes by a fraction of an inch? Harry doesn't bask in the stares, he endures them. He sits with his back to the wall when he can. His hand twitches toward where a wand should be, even when it's still tucked in his robe. This isn't a story about a boy discovering magic. This is a story about a boy who already knows what magic can do to a body, to a home, to a childhood. Their first clash comes almost immediately. Hermione quotes the rulebook. Harry quotes dueling drills, James and Sirius drilled into him, in a basement lined with wards. She insists that professors are there to keep them safe. He points out, quietly but with an edge, that authority is exactly what Death Eaters infiltrate first. She believes in exams. He believes in exit strategies. We're exploring a different axis of tension here. In canon, Hermione teaches Harry what a spell is, what a deadline is, what homework means. In this world, he is the one who, without intending to, teaches her what war does to people, how it makes you sleep lightly, how it makes you catalog every sound in a corridor, how it makes bravery less about house points and more about who you can't afford to lose. Something in Hermione shifts. Her curiosity, which began as a hunger to master spells, veers into politics. Why were the Potters in hiding if they're alive? What exactly did that half-heard prophecy say, and who decides what it means? Why does everyone's voice drop on Voldemort, while Harry says the name like it's a scar he refuses to hide? Late at night, in the common room, when the fire has burned low, and most of Gryffindor sleeps, they start to talk, not about Charm's essays, but about fairness and fear, about the difference between being special on parchment and being hunted in real life. He admits he hates the way people look at him like a symbol. She admits she's terrified that her blood status will always be a target painted on her back. Most importantly, a fragile connection forms in those quiet hours, when logic meets lived experience, when idealism meets trauma, when two first-years realize they are both, in different ways, out of their depth. It feels like the beginning of something more profound than simple friendship, even if neither of them can name it yet. And as Hermione walks back up to her dormitory one night, heart-pounding with new questions, she understands, finally, the real consequence of sitting beside Harry Potter. Befriending him won't just mean sharing notes and correcting his parchment margins. It will mean stepping, eyes open, into a conflict that could consume her entire world, and choosing, deliberately, to stay by his side. Draco, Neville, and the new axis of Hogwarts politics. Hermione may be walking back to her dormitory, but the camera of this what-if doesn't follow her up the stairs. It swings instead to a different boy stepping off the Hogwarts Express, shoes polished, expression composed, already rehearsing the lines his father drilled into him. Draco Malfoy has not been sent to school to play. He has been deployed. In a world where Voldemort never fell, the Malfoy name isn't a whisper of suspicion. It is open currency in a darkening ministry. Lucius doesn't just brag about influential friends at the club. He attends strategy meetings. He funds legislation. And as part of that machinery, he has given his son very clear instructions. There is a Potter boy at Hogwarts, raised behind charms and wards, rumored to be central to some prophecy Dumbledore once guarded. Watch him, test him, if possible, turn him. This isn't a story about a petty schoolyard rivalry that accidentally escalates. This is a story about a 13-year-old heir walking into the Great Hall, already thinking in terms of leverage, optics, and bloodlines. When Draco first sees Harry at the Gryffindor table, flanked by the bushy-haired Muggleborn and the red-headed Weasley, he doesn't only see a scrawny rival, he sees a threat to his father's world and an extraordinary opportunity to prove his own worth. And then there is Neville. Canon already gave us a boy who could have been the chosen one. Here, with Voldemort Ascendant and the Longbottom's torture not a tragic backstory, but a recent headline, that possibility feels raw, almost radioactive. Neville arrives at Hogwarts not just shy and clumsy, but haunted by the knowledge that the prophecy might have been about him, that his parents' shattered minds might have been the price paid for a destiny he never quite fulfilled. We're exploring a Neville whose hands still shake when someone mentions Azkaban, but who has memorized every defensive spell his formidable grandmother barked at him all summer. When he looks at Harry across the common room, what does he see? A boy protected where he was exposed? A mirror of what he might have been? Or something more profound, proof that the prophecy's weight can be shared. Harry's quiet presence becomes a fulcrum. Draco circles, offering polished barbs. Must be nice, Potter, hiding behind charms and famous parents while the rest of us actually face the war. Neville, to his own surprise, doesn't look away. In one charged corridor moment, he steps forward, voice low but steady, and tells Draco that some of them would give anything to have parents still alive to protect them. The insult lands, because it is true. Hermione moves between them, not as comic relief, but as the emerging strategist of a different faction. She knows her blood status makes her a target. She also knows that love of learning won't protect her if the children of Death Eaters decide to make an example. Around them, political lines harden, Slytherin as the visible tip of Voldemort's influence, Gryffindor, and a splintered Ravenclaw harboring children of Order members, Hufflepuff filled with families who are trying, desperately, to stay neutral while Muggleborns realize there is no safe middle. Most importantly, Hogwarts itself stops reading as a sanctuary. It becomes the most important front in a war of recruitment, of ideology, of quiet threats passed under library tables. We'll examine how every seating choice in the Great Hall, every paired assignment in potions, every whispered rumor about the Potter boy is actually a move on a larger chessboard. And then, just when the term's uneasy balance seems set, the castle flinches. One night, the Gryffindor common room windows explode inward without warning, glass transfigured midair into slashing silver serpents that dive straight for Harry, Hermione, Draco, who happens to be there on prefect business, and Neville, standing closest to the fire. The attack is precise, practiced, unmistakably dark. As the snakes coil and strike, a single message burns itself into the wall above the hearth in smoking green letters. The Dark Lord sees his enemies. Harry isn't hidden anymore, and none of them are just students now. The boy who lived, quietly, Harry's first years with two parents. The snakes strike, the message burns, and somewhere far from the Slytherin common room, a different fire is crackling in a cottage that should have been a grave. What if we pull back from the green-lit terror at Hogwarts and step instead into Godric's Hollow on an ordinary evening? This isn't a story about a cupboard under the stairs. This is a story about a living room, toys hovering mid-air because James has forgotten to cancel a levitation charm, teacups stirring themselves while Lily flicks her wand with absent precision, and a small boy with messy hair who has always known that this chaos is love. Harry grows up with magic as background noise, not miracle. The kettle whistles and then pours itself. Quills jot shopping lists on their own. A toy snitch zips in circles around his head, while Sirius, sprawled on the sofa, pretends to miss every catch so that Harry can teach him. Remus drops by with battered books that turn their own pages, reading aloud stories where fear is faced, not fled. It's domestic, it's ordinary, it's extraordinary. The war is there, though, like a draft under the door. Aurora robes on a peg in the hallway. The low murmur of the wireless abruptly silenced when Harry wanders in. Ward's checked twice before bed. He hears names: Voldemort, Death Eaters, Longbottom, without the full canon horror attached. When he asks, James kneels to his level and talks about courage and watching out for your friends. Lily adds the other half. Caution, wards, never wandering off alone. They curate the darkness. He learns that danger exists, but he is not its destined sacrifice. And the prophecy, in this timeline, it lives in whispers between adults, not as a brand on a child's soul. Dumbledore presses, of course. He believes in destiny and necessary preparation, but Lily believes in childhood. So what if, instead of, "You are the chosen one," Harry grows up with the gentler, infuriatingly vague refrain that he is important, that his choices will matter, that he has something worth fighting for, but not that the world is balanced on his scar. That difference reshapes him. This Harry is still impulsive, still drawn to the center of the storm, but he is not starving for approval. He doesn't fling himself into danger to prove he deserves to exist. He already knows he is loved. The bond with his parents is secure, almost unshakable, and yet, because he is bright and restless, the safety sometimes feels like a cage. Why can't he go to Diagon Alley alone yet? Why can Neville visit more often, but they never visit the Longbottoms unannounced? Why does the room go quiet when he walks in at the wrong moment? We're exploring a boy raised in a fortress built of affection and secrecy. Most importantly, we'll examine what happens when that fortress meets the one place his parents cannot fully control: Hogwarts. The first crack appears on a summer morning when an unfamiliar owl taps on the kitchen window and drops a heavy envelope onto the table. Harry Potter, the small bedroom, Godric's Hollow. In that moment, the cottage feels suddenly too small. The letter isn't an escape from abuse. It's an invitation to step beyond the walls that have always protected him, and the beginning of the end of quiet. A different platform, 9 3/4, meeting Ron and Hermione again. The cottage feels too small, and then suddenly, so does the Muggle station. King's Cross is all steam and echoes, but this time the camera doesn't find a thin, nervous boy trailing a distant family that can't wait to be rid of him. It finds James and Lily Potter, overprepared and overprotective, flanking their son like a pair of very determined bodyguards. What if the platform scene we know in canon was never about being abandoned at a barrier, but about learning how to let go of parents who have always, maybe too fiercely, held on? Lily fusses over his trunk, over his tie, over his wand. She checks his pocket twice, then a third time, fingers brushing the holster Sirius insisted he wear. James is worse. He walks Harry through last-minute jinx drills under his breath, turns the mundane act of crossing the barrier into a coded briefing. Eyes up, wand hand free, trust your instincts. This isn't a story about a boy desperate for any affection he can get. This is a story about a child who has always known he is loved, being asked to step into danger with his eyes open, and we're exploring how that love changes every connection that follows. On the train, Harry doesn't hover in the corridor, waiting to be rescued from loneliness. He picks a compartment, throws himself onto the seat with the casual sprawl of someone used to marauder teasing and kitchen table war stories, and starts watching, curious, slightly cocky. When a lanky redhead appears at the door, ears pink, asking if he can sit, Harry doesn't cling to the first friendly face. He just grins and says, "Sure, I'm Harry," as if the name is a fact, not a legend. Ron's awe still sparks, of course. The boy who lived, except in this timeline, the boy whose parents fought and survived. But when Ron stammers through questions, Harry deflects with easy banter, mentioning pranks Sirius taught him, the way Lily hexed James for swearing at the kettle. There's less hero worship, more back and forth. How does Ron react when the person he's meeting isn't a mirror of his own insecurity, but someone who actually seems fine? It pushes him, quietly, toward equality rather than pedestal building. Then, the door slides open again. Hermione Granger fills the frame with questions and certainty, spells already on her tongue. In canon, she fractures the fragile first bond between two lonely boys. Here, she interrupts something more stable, and that changes everything. Harry doesn't bristle at a threat to his only friendship. He leans forward, intrigued. Who is this girl who's already mastered half the book list, who speaks about magic like an equation and a poem at once? We'll examine that first look. The way Harry's eyes sharpen when she corrects Ron, not with annoyance, but with fascination. The way he tests her, mentioning complex charms Lily has shown him. Watching Hermione's mind catch and blaze, there is a spark of mutual curiosity, of two problem solvers recognizing each other long before love, long before war. Most importantly, this moment plants something more profound than simple friendship. When courage meets brilliance, when a boy raised on resistance meets a girl who has always fought with her mind, their bond becomes something worth fighting for. And as the train hurtles toward Hogwarts, we're left with a question. If Harry starts this journey able to choose his people, rather than cling to whoever will have him, who does he stand with when the war finally comes? The Sorting Hat hesitates. House, identity, and a very different Harry. So what happens when that boy, raised on resistance instead of neglect, sits beneath an ancient hat that can see every secret his parents tried to hide? The brim falls over Harry's eyes, and for a heartbeat, he isn't in the Great Hall at all. He's on James's knee, listening to stories of Gryffindor like they're war songs. He's at the kitchen table with Sirius reenacting Quidditch victories. He's on the sofa with Remus, learning that courage isn't loud, it's choosing to stand up again. But there's also Lily, tracing constellations in his textbook margins, talking about Ravenclaw as a house that loves questions, not just answers. And in late-night whispers, she's told him the truth about Slytherin. Dangerous, not evil. A house that produced Voldemort, yes, but also people who chose something more profound than fear. What if, this time, Harry walks to the stool already knowing House's strategy, not destiny? He's heard the prophecy. He knows there is a war that didn't end, only paused. He has spent years hearing James and Lily argue, quietly but fiercely, about how much to tell him, how early to train him, whether Hogwarts can actually keep him safe. Inside his head, the hat's voice slides in like a second consciousness. Ambitious, it notes first, and Harry flinches because that word has always sounded too close to Slytherin in the Prophet headlines, but the hat doesn't mean it as an accusation. It tastes his determination to live, to keep his parents alive, to make the prophecy a choice rather than a sentence. Courage, yes, drilled into him by dueling in the garden, by Remus's calm insistence that fear is information, not shame. And then, like a flare, that sharp, analytical mind Lily has honed with puzzles, essays, and quiet evenings reading about Fidelius charms and magical contracts. We're exploring a Harry who doesn't just react, he calculates. Of course the hat wavers between Gryffindor and Ravenclaw. Of course there's a flicker, brief but real, toward Slytherin, toward the idea of infiltrating the house that shelters so many of Voldemort's sympathizers. Can he win from within? Should he? The hat presses. Ravenclaw would give him space to think, to study the prophecy, to become a strategist rather than a symbol. Gryffindor would give him a banner, a visible place from which to lead. Slytherin would give him access, secrets, danger. What does he value most? This isn't a story about a panicked boy whispering, "Not Slytherin," because he's terrified of being bad. This is a story about a child who has been treated like a general in training, choosing the battlefield that makes the most sense. Harry argues back, silently but fiercely. He needs Gryffindor's visibility to inspire resistance, but he will think like a Ravenclaw, question like one, refuse to be only his father's son. Gryffindor, he tells the hat, not as a plea, but as a plan. So when the table explodes in cheers, he isn't wide-eyed with awe. He's already mapping alliances, scanning faces, wondering which pureblood names might be tied to Death Eaters, which Muggleborns might need protection. He notes the Slytherin table too, cataloging Malfoy's sneer, the tight clusters of black-robed students. School and war will happen together. He has always known that. Most importantly, the hat knows it too. As it shouts his house, it slips one last whisper into his mind, a warning about prophecies fulfilled in school corridors, about a Dark Lord who has not fallen, about a castle that will not be the safe haven James and Lily promised. Living legends in the staff room, James, Lily, and Remus at Hogwarts. So what if, in this darker Hogwarts, the adults we always beg to arrive early actually do? What if the cavalry walks straight into the castle, and discovers that their presence doesn't simplify Harry's life at all, but makes everything more tangled, more public, more dangerous? Dumbledore moves first. He has a still-rising Voldemort, a prophecy that has not fully triggered, and a boy who will not be allowed to remain just a boy. Remus is invited in quietly, not as the desperate last-minute hire of canon, but as a deliberate choice. Defense against the dark arts professor from Harry's first year, a calm, scarred authority who knows what war looks like when it bleeds into classrooms. His lessons are sharper, more honest. Dueling drills begin earlier. The Patronus charm is not a miraculous third-year bonus. It is framed as basic survival, and Remus is not alone. Lily, who in this timeline has had a decade to deepen her charms and arithmancy research, appears as an external expert, officially. She guest lectures on complex protections, on the arithmetic of prophecy, on the way magic can be bent but not broken. Unofficially, she is the quiet mind Dumbledore cannot fully control, the witch who will look him in the eye in the staff room and ask, very softly, why her son is being placed near cursed artifacts and three-headed dogs. James arrives differently. He remains an Auror, an active Order operative, and so his presence is intermittent but electric. Some weeks he is the ministry's official liaison for security briefings. Other weeks, he is just a guest Quidditch coach, walking onto the pitch with that effortless swagger, demonstrating dives that make even the Slytherins stare. In canon, Harry is the orphan celebrity. Here, he is the boy who walks through the corridors and knows half the staff by first name. That changes the politics instantly. McGonagall gains allies in every meeting. Snape, deprived of the silent superiority of being the only one with a personal history with James, finds himself the outnumbered voice in staff arguments about discipline, about curriculum, about how much truth students should hear. Some teachers idolize the Potters as living legends. Others resent the way their war follows them into lesson plans and house points. Even among adults, fault lines appear. For Harry, the social impact is brutal in its own, quieter way. He is not the mysterious boy who lived. He is the son whose mother drops into charms to observe, whose father critiques his seeker form after practice. Some students see him as untouchable, the heir to a famous bond of love and resistance. Others mutter about favoritism when Gryffindor wins a Quidditch match James attended, or when Lily's guest lecture just happens to align with Harry's homework crisis. He is always watched. He is never just another first year, and inside Harry, something fractures. Hogwarts was supposed to be the place where he finally acts, where he is not simply protected, but participating, yet his parents' instinct is to shield, to hover, to insist that he report every whisper of danger. This isn't a story about ungratefulness. This is a story about a boy trying to breathe under the weight of love. How do you carve out an identity when the legends you're meant to live up to are sitting at the staff table every night? Remus becomes the bridge. He remembers James at 15, reckless and radiant. He remembers Lily at 17, fierce and principled. He can see, with painful clarity, that Harry is both of them and neither. In quiet office conversations, he tells James that protecting Harry from every risk will only drive him into secret ones. In late-night walks around the lake, he tells Harry that his parents' fear is not a cage, but a scar, and scars can be understood. Most importantly, Remus is the one who begins to think strategically about what this configuration means. A still-rising Dark Lord, a prophecy in waiting, a boy with too much visibility and not enough agency. We're exploring a Hogwarts where the Marauders have grown up, but the war has not ended, and Lupin, of all people, starts to sketch the outlines of a plan, how to use Harry's presence without sacrificing his childhood completely, how to involve Hermione, the girl with the questions, the girl who sees patterns, in choices that will define not just their house, but the entire resistance. He will be the one, later, who nudges Harry and Hermione together at the edge of impossible decisions, who recognizes that their connection is not a distraction from the war, but something more profound, something worth fighting for. And as the first year unfolds under this new constellation of adults, the question hanging over the castle is not just whether Harry will survive Voldemort, it is whether he can survive being loved this loudly, this publicly, this relentlessly, and still become the person the prophecy might yet demand. No cupboard under the stairs. How a loved Harry meets Hermione Granger. So what happens when that loved, loudly protected Harry walks straight into the path of a girl who has never once felt truly chosen? Hermione Granger's backstory does not bend for this timeline. She is still brilliant, still Muggle-born, still the girl who read every book on the list twice and then asked for an updated edition. She still arrives at Hogwarts with her prefect energy already fully charged, desperate to prove she belongs in a world that, on paper, has every reason to reject her. The teeth are still a little too big, the hair still refuses to behave, and the loneliness is still a constant, humming ache under every raised hand. In canon, she meets a boy who is starving for any kind of affection. Here, she meets a boy who has never wondered if he is loved. That changes everything. Harry is not scanning the train for the first person who smiles at him. He has Sirius's jokes in his ears, Remus's quiet questions in his head, Lily's standards in his bones. He is used to strong, intelligent women being the center of gravity in a room. So when Hermione corrects a charm in Transfiguration, and half the class rolls their eyes, he doesn't flinch from the intensity. He leans toward it. We're exploring a Harry who watches Hermione, not because he needs a friend at any cost, but because something in the way she thinks feels familiar. McGonagall has already been to the Potters for tea, already discussed advanced theory with Lily over the kitchen table. Harry has grown up hearing words like arithmetic error in the runes and elegant solution tossed around with affection. When Hermione mutters under her breath about wand movement inefficiencies, it hits him like déjà vu. Their first real connection moment doesn't happen in a bathroom with a troll, it happens in the library with a whisper. Hermione is buried in a stack of books on magical contracts, reading ahead for no assignment at all, just in case. Harry, chasing a half-remembered phrase from Dumbledore about old magic and protections, finds the same aisle. He asks what she's reading, actually waits for the answer, and then, this is the pattern interrupt, asks why she thinks the Ministry relies so heavily on oaths when intent clearly matters more. No one ever asks Hermione why she thinks. They ask what she knows. There's a difference, and she feels it like a door opening. For Harry, the shock is quieter, more unsettling. As she launches into an analysis that sounds uncannily like Lily dissecting the Fidelius charm at the kitchen table, he feels comforted and disoriented at once. Is he seeing his mother's mind reflected back at him, or something entirely new that just happens to rhyme with it? What if that familiarity is the first thread in a very different bond? Most importantly, this isn't a story about Hermione orbiting Harry's trauma or Ron's humor. This is a story about Harry beginning to orbit Hermione's mind. In class, his eyes flick to her parchment when a concept eludes him. In the common room, he drifts toward whatever chair she's claimed, pretending it's about the firelight. Together, they start trading questions instead of comforts. One late evening, with the war still a rumor adults won't fully name, Harry watches Hermione read by the common room embers, her brow furrowed over a book on prophecies he didn't even know Hogwarts owned. He realizes, suddenly and a little breathlessly, that he wants her opinion on the strange words that have always shadowed his name, on what a prophecy actually means for a boy who was never marked. He doesn't know why her answer matters so much, but it does, and that quiet realization is where everything begins to tilt. The Philosopher's Stone, without a Dursley-shaped wound. Harry doesn't look for escape routes when he walks into Hogwarts. He looks for patterns. That moment in the library, with Hermione's brow furrowed over prophecies, becomes less about his fear and more about training. What if the boy who lived with Aurors and war heroes doesn't default to panic, but to investigation? James has told him how Snape brewed antidotes under fire. Lily has explained what a cursed mind looks like. Remus has taught him to map a battlefield, so when a troll appears, when a Cerberus lurks on the third floor, when a nervous defense professor stutters too perfectly, Harry doesn't just flinch, he starts a case file in his head. This isn't a story about a lonely child projecting his worst Dursley memories onto the first adult who scowls at him. This is a story about a marauder's son quietly testing hypotheses. Snape's robe catching fire at the Quidditch match? In canon, it's proof of guilt. Here, Harry remembers Lily mentioning Severus's obsessive counter-curse work in the war and asks, who benefits from us looking the wrong way? He watches Quirrell's eyes, his wand hand, the way he always seems to be near, never central. Suspicion becomes measured, almost clinical, even as his heart hammers, and that changes the trio before they even know they're a trio. When Harry suggests breaking curfew to check the third-floor corridor, he doesn't shrug and say, why not? He lays out a strategy. If someone is trying to steal whatever Fluffy is guarding, they'll test the protections during holidays. If they wait for McGonagall to act, Quirrell might already have adapted. Hermione hears not childish rebellion, but a reasoned risk. Her rule-following cracks earlier, not because she stops caring about rules, but because she finally meets a first year who can argue ethics like a seasoned prefect. Ron, standing between Harry's marauder logic and Hermione's encyclopedic caution, can't just be comic relief. He becomes the normal wizard baseline, the one who knows what's actually considered mad at Hogwarts. He asks the grounding questions we're thinking. Are you sure Dumbledore doesn't already know? Are you sure we're not walking into something we can't walk out of? Are you sure this isn't about proving you're special? His doubt forces Harry to articulate motives, not just impulses, and that articulation forges their bond. Meanwhile, the adults are not looking away. Remus, back at Hogwarts as a quiet consultant for defense curriculum, notices Quirrell's convenient fainting spells. Lily, volunteering in the infirmary, sees the aftershocks of a possessed man's magic in the burns and hex patterns on students who fell down the stairs. McGonagall's patrols tighten, wards are recalibrated, Quirrell is pressed, forced into subtler, more desperate moves. So when the children step in, it's not because every adult has failed, it's because Harry looks at his parents and their friends, already carrying too much, and chooses to shoulder part of the weight. That choice reframes the final descent. Through the devil's snare, the keys, the chessboard, he isn't sleepwalking toward martyrdom. He is making a calculated trade, his body, his magic, his presence, for a chance that James and Lily never have to stand in front of Voldemort alone again. Most importantly, his courage is saturated with love, not with a death wish. When Quirrell's hands close on him, and the pain explodes, it isn't the echo of a mother's death he's never witnessed. It's the backlash of a lifetime of living, breathing protection. Voldemort recoils, but what exactly does he learn from touching a Harry who has never been hollowed by loss, only armored by love? As Quirrell falls and the stone is saved, that question hangs in the air like smoke, unanswered, waiting to ignite what comes next. Voldemort regroups, a Dark Lord who never fell. Voldemort recoils from that contact in the chamber beneath Hogwarts, and for the first time in our timeline, he retreats not as a fallen god, but as a wounded general. What if the Dark Lord never shattered into myth, never became a punchline whispered about as you-know-who vanished, but remained a constant rational threat shaping every choice everyone makes? In this universe, his attempt on Harry's life at Godric's Hollow never happened. The Fidelius held. Peter never spoke. There was no screaming house, no ruined crib, no disembodied wraith fleeing into the night. Instead, Voldemort has spent years pressing against the edges of protections he cannot quite unravel, experimenting with proxies, curses, and sympathetic magic, each failure leeching at his strength. He is weakened by his own Horcrux-torn soul, and by the parasitic rituals he uses to anchor himself to borrowed bodies. But he is never fully cast out. He can still command, he can still plan, and that changes everything, because his followers never watch him fall. They never break in the way canon Death Eaters do. There is no mass panic, no desperate scramble to claim imperious defenses, no Azkaban trials framed as the aftermath of a miracle victory. Instead, under his explicit orders, the Death Eaters melt into disciplined cells, families like the Malfoys, fanatics like Bellatrix, opportunists in the Ministry, waiting, listening, infiltrating. Fear in the wizarding world becomes chronic rather than explosive. People still flinch at the mark in the sky, but there is no anniversary of his defeat, no boy who lived to prove that he can be beaten. There is only the sense that he is always out there, watching, inevitable. The Ministry, without a baby-shaped symbol of triumph, cannot pretend the war is over. Fudge has no legend to hide behind. Barty Crouch Sr. has no definitive victory to justify his brutalities. The Prophet cannot print that cathartic headline. So the propaganda war twists differently. Official statements that the situation is under control, that you-know-who is weakened, that cooperation with Aurors is stronger than ever, all without the emotional anchor of a child who survived the unsurvivable. Voldemort leans into this vacuum. Through whispers, imperious editors, and carefully staged attacks, he paints himself not as a monster returning from the dead, but as a force that was never truly gone, a dark weather pattern you must learn to live under, because you cannot dispel it. And the prophecy? It still hangs between him and Dumbledore, like a drawn wand. He knows enough to be certain there is a child born as his equal, a child he must either control or kill. But the Potters are not martyrs. They are a problem. Their continued survival, their hidden home, their unbroken bond with Harry drive him towards something more methodical. This isn't a story about a reckless tyrant overreaching in one dramatic night. This is a story about obsession cooling into strategy. If he cannot smash the prophecy, he will shape it. So he turns his gaze, again and again, toward Hogwarts. Not as a stage for a glorious comeback, but as a resource, a place where Harry will always return, a place where future Death Eaters can be groomed under respectable names, a fortress full of ancient magic and hidden chambers he once walked as Tom Riddle. We're exploring a Voldemort who understands that to own the future, you don't just terrorize the present, you educate it. His next moves will be slower, subtler, and therefore far more dangerous. A defense teacher here, a cursed object there, a headmaster's trust, eroded one small compromise at a time. If he never falls, if he is never reduced to a ghost story, then every corridor at Hogwarts becomes a potential front line, every friendship a potential lever. And as Harry walks those corridors with both parents alive somewhere in the world, the question quietly shifts. Will he grow into a symbol of open defiance, or into a boy being carefully, patiently positioned as the prophecy's perfect trap? The chamber reopens, under watchful eyes. If every corridor is a potential front line, then the words on the wall are not a prank, not a puzzle, but an act of war. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware. In canon, that line launches a mystery. Here, with Voldemort never fallen, it detonates like a declaration. Because what if those enemies aren't abstract? What if they have names Lily Potter knows from Order rosters? Names Remus Lupin has watched bleed? What if one of them is Hermione Granger, Muggle-born, brilliant, already too close to Lily's son? This isn't a story about a school cut off from the wider conflict. This is a story about the war finally breaching the one sanctuary Harry's parents thought they could trust. Lily reads the report, sees the word mudblood whispered in the corridors, and she doesn't see childish cruelty. She sees Death Eater ideology taking root in her son's hallway. Remus, defense professor, and still wary marauder, walks the crime scene with the grim focus of a veteran. Mrs. Norris stiff on the floor, water pooling, spiders fleeing. He files every detail away because he has learned, painfully, that Hogwarts is always one step away from becoming a battlefield. For Hermione, there is no buffer. From day one, she understands that this isn't an isolated horror, it is escalation. Her parents live in a world with no Aurors, no wards, no howlers. Each slur, each whispered mudblood, is a reminder that the ideology that wants her dead has already marked her family as collateral. And when she feels Harry's hand find hers in that corridor, when she hears his breathing go sharp at the sight of the blood on the wall, she realizes he is taking this personally too. Harry has heard his mother's stories about raids, about names read out in the Prophet, with the same casual detachment as a Quidditch score. Seeing the message, he doesn't just feel fear, he feels rage, a clean, focused anger that has nothing to do with fame and everything to do with love. Hermione isn't just his friend in danger, she is his partner in every late-night study session, every whispered strategy for surviving a world that wants to use him and erase her. Most importantly, he refuses to let the chamber become another story of adults keeping children in the dark, so their dynamic shifts. We're exploring a trio that is already war-aware, already practiced at moving together. Hermione leads the research, but Harry isn't just her audience. He is her equal, cross-referencing spells, questioning sources, pushing her to rest when her eyes blur over ancient scripts. Ron, meanwhile, is forced into a role he never asked for, cultural translator. He knows which pureblood families still mutter about good breeding at dinner. He knows the old tales about Slytherin's monster, the way his Aunt Muriel talks, as if Muggleborns are a recent regrettable experiment. Explaining that to Hermione means confronting where the Weasleys stand, blood traitors by choice, not by accident, and then the pattern interrupts. Library, corridor, bathroom pipes, polyjuice theories. They're building something extraordinary together, a web of clues tight enough that in another universe, it might actually catch the culprit before the final strike. But War is not impressed by 12-year-old brilliance. Hermione doesn't make it to the next planning session. Harry finds her on the floor, frozen mid-run, eyes wide and unseeing, mirror still clutched in her hand. In canon, this moment is a shock that pushes the plot forward. Here, it is a shattering confirmation of what he already knows, that his connection to her is something more profound, something worth fighting for, with a ferocity he has only ever associated with his parents. He does not, in that first heartbeat, think of Dumbledore, or of prophecies, or of the abstract war effort. He thinks only of Hermione. His knees hit the stone. His hand hovers over her face, not quite daring to touch. And in the silence of that corridor, with the basilisk still unseen and the diary's secrets still festering, Harry Potter makes a promise that will change the way he walks into the chamber. Whoever did this will never, ever touch her again. Tom Riddle's diary, and the first real choice between love and destiny, who walks into the Chamber of Secrets when Harry Potter has already vowed that no one will ever touch Hermione Granger again. What if the boy descending into the darkness isn't chasing glory or prophecy, but defending a bond that has already become something worth fighting for? In the echoing stillness, with Ginny's small form crumpled on the stone, Tom Riddle turns his attention on Harry. In canon, he finds a lonely child, dazzled and confused by his own legend. Here, when Riddle presses in, when he tastes the edges of Harry's mind through the diary's connection, he finds something else entirely. Not a desperate boy craving validation, a fiercely tethered one. Images flash, Hermione's hand dragging him toward the library, her voice arguing with Lockhart, her brow furrowed over Polyjuice plans, her still petrified face on that hospital bed. Riddle pauses. This is new. He starts to prod, to test. "You're afraid," he says, almost curious. Not of death, of losing them, the mudblood girl, especially, the one who thinks she's clever. And this is where the AU cuts deeper than canon, because Harry has actually known love his whole life. James and Lily alive, Sirius free, Remus a constant presence, the Weasleys' warmth, Dumbledore's watchful regard, Hermione's relentless, brilliant loyalty. When Riddle sneers that love is a chain, something to be yanked, something to be used, Harry feels the insult like a hex. We're exploring a confrontation where the taunts aren't about fame at all. Riddle doesn't care about the boy who lived myth, because in this timeline, there is no myth, no fall of Voldemort to obsess over. Instead, he circles Harry's attachments like a predator. "I could kill the girl," he muses, glancing at Ginny, "and the clever one will break. Or I could kill the clever one, and the little Weasley will spend her life knowing she wasn't worth saving." He promises that Voldemort will exploit every connection, every friendship, every love, until Harry stands alone or breaks. And Harry's answer is our pivot. This isn't a story about abstract heroism. This is a story about a boy who refuses to let that ideology of blood purity and emotional emptiness define his world. He doesn't raise the sword for prophecy, or because Dumbledore might have plans, or because destiny demands a champion. He raises it because Riddle has dared to touch Ginny, dared to threaten Hermione, dared to sneer at the very thing that has always made his life extraordinary. So when Fawkes arrives, when the basilisk falls, when the diary is destroyed, Harry's victory is both political and deeply personal. He has, in one impossible moment, defended a Weasley, avenged Hermione, and chosen love over terror as his guiding principle, which is why the quiet aftermath matters so much. After the Mandrake draft, after the cheering and the house points and the relieved parents, we find him at Hermione's bedside. The curtain shields them from the bustle. Her eyes are bright, too bright, as she drinks him in, cataloging injuries, searching for proof that he's really alright. Their first conversation after the crisis is awkward in all the ways that reveal too much. She thanks him for saving Ginny. He stumbles over how he couldn't let Riddle win, but doesn't explain that in his mind, win meant proving that love is weakness. There's a beat, a held breath. Then, Hermione asks very softly, "What did he say to you, down there?" It's not the basilisk she's asking about, and Harry knows it. He hesitates, not over the horror, not over the blood, but over repeating the one thing Riddle said that still claws at his chest, that the people he loves most are his greatest weakness. And in that hesitation, we feel it. The first real choice forming between destiny and love, between the war they're sliding toward, and the connection that might one day redefine it. A world without the boy, who lived myth, politics, media, and fear. But what happens when that choice doesn't exist only inside Harry's chest, but inside an entire country's? What if the real danger of removing the boy who lived myth isn't that Voldemort simply wins, but that the system learns how to live with him? Because in this world, the Ministry never got its miracle. There was no Halloween collapse, no vanishing Dark Lord, no easy headline to package into a fairy tale. So instead of complacent denial, we're exploring something colder, a ministry that openly acknowledges Voldemort as a threat while quietly reshaping law and life for your safety. Curfews in certain districts, expanded Auror powers, new registration protocols for Muggle-borns and high-risk families, all framed not as oppression but as containment. They don't say, "He's gone." They say, "He's being managed." They hint at ongoing negotiations with unnamed pureblood interests, as if Death Eaters were just another lobby. This isn't a story about a government pretending there is no war. This is a story about a government deciding which parts of that war are profitable to keep. And the Daily Prophet? Without a boy who lived, there is no single shining symbol to plaster on the front page, no scar to anchor hope. So the paper oscillates day by day, headline by headline. One week, it's fear-mongering, grainy photos of masked figures over Diagon Alley, breathless speculation about Muggle-born infiltration, editorials asking whether mixed marriages are escalating tensions. The next week, it's appeasement, soft-focus interviews with respectable purebloods, arguing that if everyone would just respect traditional boundaries, violence would fade, and threaded through it all, the Potters, not martyrs, not saints, a living, inconvenient reminder of a prophecy the public half remembers and half fears. When leaks about Trelawney's words slip through, the prophet doesn't crown Harry a savior. It asks whether James and Lily are irresponsible for hiding their prophesied son instead of cooperating with ministry strategy. In canon, Harry is dragged into the spotlight as a symbol. Here, the ministry and media weaponize his absence from it. That atmosphere seeps into Hogwarts like damp through stone. House rivalries stop being mostly about Quidditch and personalities and become explicitly about blood. Slytherin corridors echo with careful coded boasts about family connections. Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw whisper about which professors are safe. Gryffindor is split between those who want to fight and those who just want to keep their heads down. For Muggleborns like Hermione, every corridor conversation is a calculation. She hears policy debates about registration and knows they're talking about her life. She reads The Prophet, then cross-references old laws in the library, tracing how security decrees quietly resurrect language from the First War. She learns that every euphemism hides a wound. Harry, meanwhile, has something Hermione doesn't: the Order's half-spoken stories over late-night tea at the Potter's kitchen table, names of raids, lists of the missing, Dumbledore's cautions about which ministry officials can never be trusted. He grows up hearing that the ministry is necessary, but not neutral. Together, their bond becomes an act of analysis. Hermione brings the texts, the history, the clauses buried in footnotes. Harry brings faces, missions, the way fear moves through a room when Remus falls silent mid-sentence. And slowly, they realize, defeating Voldemort can't just be about a duel in a graveyard. It has to be about dismantling the scaffolding that lets a Dark Lord be treated like a stakeholder. Most importantly, they begin to understand that their love, their connection, is not just personal comfort in a frightening world. It is a way of seeing together, of refusing the narratives they are being sold, of quietly deciding that changing this world might be something worth fighting for. And once two brilliant, stubborn teenagers start questioning not only the Dark Lord, but the entire stage he stands on, what happens when the stage starts to notice them? Prisoner without Azkaban, Sirius Black's freedom and its price. When the stage starts to notice them, it doesn't just look at Harry and Hermione, it looks past them, over their shoulders, to the adults who shaped them. And in this world, the most dangerous of those shadows is not locked in Azkaban. He is laughing in the Potter's kitchen. What if the man canon condemned to a cell is instead the loudest, brightest presence in Harry's adolescence? Sirius Black as a free man is not a myth or a memory. He is a visible, volatile force, an Auror and Order operative who treats every mission like a dare and every quiet evening like a challenge to make life less quiet. One week, he's vanishing for days to sabotage a Death Eater smuggling ring. The next, he's teaching Harry how to charm the Gryffindor common room ceiling into a live Quidditch replay. This isn't a story about a damaged godfather trying to make up for lost time. This is a story about what happens when the most reckless marauder never loses those 12 years at all. James and Sirius are still war-bonded, still trading glances that say, without words, "We got out once, we'll get out again." Their loyalty is unshaken, their private jokes intact, their daring now weaponized for the Order instead of schoolyard mischief. But that unbroken bond has a cost. Remus, in this timeline, isn't the guilty outsider. He's the one who stayed soft while the world hardened, the quiet center between two adrenaline addicts who are always one decision away from disaster. We're exploring a Marauders dynamic where there is no betrayal trauma to fracture them, yet there is a different fracture, the slow pressure of being the only cautious voice in a room that prefers heroics. Remus is the one reminding Sirius that werewolf prejudice, or politics, and ministry surveillance haven't vanished just because they are laughing together again. For Harry, growing up inside this orbit, rebellion looks different. He doesn't need to break rules to escape a cupboard. He breaks them to escape being wrapped in protective wards and parental worry. Sirius is the one who winks and says, "Rules are suggestions," who slips him advanced hex theory texts at 12, who cheers when Harry and Hermione dismantle a defense essay and rebuild it into something extraordinary. James and Lily, watching their son's godfather encourage every wild impulse, feel the friction sharpen. Late-night arguments in the kitchen about boundaries, about risk, about whether love can be too protective. Most importantly, Sirius's freedom paints a target on his back, his open rejection of pure-blood norms, his public defiance at ministry hearings, his visible, unashamed closeness to the Potters. These become data points in Voldemort's new strategy. If the prophecy hangs unresolved, and the boy who lived myth never forms, then perhaps the Dark Lord looks for something more profound to break. Not a legend, but a living bond. And so, there is a night, one of those rare calm nights, when Sirius sits with Harry on the back step, stars cold above them, and says almost lightly that love is worth any risk. Harry laughs, believes him, lets the words settle. He doesn't yet understand that one day, in a much darker corridor, those same words will echo back as both a promise and a threat. The werewolf in the classroom, Remus, secrets, and trust. Harry doesn't understand yet, but Remus does. Because while Sirius talks about love as a risk under the stars, Remus Lupin is quietly living the other half of that sentence in the classroom. Love as responsibility, love as restraint, love as the choice to be trustworthy in a world that rewards secrets and punishes honesty. And what if the real test of who you love isn't whether you die for them, but whether you'll keep living under the weight of their secrets and never put them down? At Hogwarts, with war humming beneath every corridor, Remus becomes the most stable adult in Harry's life, almost by accident. James is brilliant but volatile, Sirius is fierce but reckless, Lily is wise but stretched thin between activism and motherhood. Remus is the one who stands at the intersection of all of them. He remembers the Marauders' wild nights, the thrill of breaking rules together, but he also remembers Lily's steady voice saying, "You're better than this." In class, he smiles when Harry pulls a clever stunt, but after, he quietly asks Hermione what she thinks the consequences will be. He doesn't shut Harry down, he invites Hermione in. This is a story about balance, about how, in this timeline, Remus doesn't just teach defense against the dark arts, he teaches Harry that courage without judgment is a weapon, and judgment without compassion is cruelty. He praises Harry's quick wand work, then assigns Hermione extra reading on magical ethics, and accidentally leaves the book open, where Harry will see it. He suggests they study together. He knows exactly what he's doing. But Remus has a secret of his own, and in this darker world, lycanthropy isn't just a private shame, it is a political liability. The Ministry, desperate to appear strong while Voldemort never truly fell, files werewolf registries under security measures. Death Eaters whisper about weaponizing monsters. One exposed condition, and Remus becomes leverage against the Order, against the Potters, against Harry himself. In canon, the reveal is explosive and public. Here, we're exploring something more intimate, more dangerous. Hermione notices the absences, the precise lunar pattern, the way Madame Pomfrey glances at the sky before asking if Professor Lupin needs anything. Hermione doesn't reach for superstition, she reaches for Muggle science. She reads about chronic illness, about infection myths, about how fear turns people into policy, and then she tests her theory. She confronts him after class, voice shaking but clear. Harry is there because of course he is. Remus has been his uncle, in all but name, since he could walk. When Remus very quietly says, "Yes, I'm a werewolf," the room doesn't explode. It contracts. Harry doesn't flinch. How could he? This is the man who taught him to cast a proper shield charm, and to make tea when Lily was too tired to stand. Hermione's eyes fill, not with fear, but with outrage at a world that would use this against him. Between them, a decision forms without fanfare. They will protect this secret together. Most importantly, this shared knowledge becomes a rehearsal for the kind of love they're learning to practice. They start to understand that trust isn't just believing someone's strengths, it's holding their weaknesses so carefully that the world never gets to weaponize them. When, later, prophecies and horcruxes and war trauma enter the picture, this is the template. Harry will hold Hermione's fear of failing him. Hermione will hold Harry's terror of becoming a symbol instead of a person. Remus taught them that. And as the moon rises over Hogwarts, as Remus locks his office door and they sit outside pretending not to count the hours, we'll examine how that quiet, painful loyalty becomes something worth fighting for, and how, one night, it will be tested in a way none of them are ready for. Divination, destiny, and a girl who refuses to believe in fate. The moon sets, the howls fade, and by morning, Hogwarts is pretending to be ordinary again. But in third-year divination, nothing feels ordinary to Harry Potter. What if you walked into a room full of crystal balls and perfumed smoke, knowing that somewhere, in a locked drawer in Dumbledore's office, there is a real prophecy with your name on it? For Harry, raised with that knowledge, Trelawney's classroom isn't comic relief. It's a cruel echo, a parody of the single sentence that has always hovered at the edge of his parents' conversations. She peers at his palm, at his tea leaves, at the shape of his soul in a smudge of ink, and every time she breathes the word death, Harry feels his scar itch with memory that isn't memory, with a future that might already be written. He laughs with Ron when he's supposed to. He rolls his eyes at the theatrics. But we're exploring a Harry who cannot quite shake the feeling that he is being mocked by the universe. Hermione sees it. Of course she does. At first, her fury is academic. The charts are meaningless, the predictions unfalsifiable, the methodology an insult to every book she's ever loved. This isn't a story about a girl who just dislikes woolly thinking. This is a story about a girl who, watching Harry flinch at every casual mention of doom, realizes that divination isn't merely wrong, it's dangerous, because underneath her raised hand and clipped questions, something more profound is forming, a rejection, not of magic, but of the idea that Harry's life is a fixed line on some cosmic timetable. When Trelawney gasps that Harry was born under a dark and terrible sign, Hermione's chair scrapes back harder than it needs to. She is not just defending reason, she is defending his right to be more than a headline. The confrontation comes after class, in an empty corridor that smells of dust and old stone. Harry, still pale, mutters that maybe Trelawney is ridiculous, but the prophecy in the Department of Mysteries isn't. His parents heard it, Dumbledore believes it, Voldemort is acting like it's true. Maybe I don't have a choice, he says, and the resignation in his voice terrifies her more than any grim. Hermione's reply is almost a shout. How many terrible things, she demands, have happened because powerful people decided prophecy was instruction instead of warning? If Voldemort marked him because of a prophecy, doesn't that prove choice still existed before the spell was cast? Believing he must face Voldemort alone, she argues, is how he'll end up alone. We'll examine this as the moment her love becomes open rebellion against the script itself, when chaos meets logic, when fear meets fury, when a boy half convinced he is a symbol meets the one person who refuses to let him be only that. Most importantly, they do not solve it. They reach a fragile compromise. The prophecy is information, not command. They will treat it as one more fact to analyze together, not a cage to obey. But as they walk back to the common room, their hands brush and then fall apart, and the silence between them is thick with everything they haven't agreed on. That night, while Harry sleeps restlessly, Hermione sits alone in the library, ink on her fingers, surrounded by dusty volumes on oracular magic. She is not trying to prove that fate is real. She is hunting for loopholes, for mistranslations, for failures, for any precedent where a prophecy broke instead of a person. Because if the world insists Harry has been written into a tragedy, then Hermione Granger will quietly, stubbornly rewrite the ending. And as the candles burn low around her, we're exploring the most extraordinary question of all. What if love itself is the flaw in the prophecy, the one thing the seers never learned how to see? Time turners and the first taste of changing time. So what happens when that quiet vow to rewrite the ending stops being metaphorical and becomes literal? What if the girl hoarding books like weapons is suddenly handed the one artifact that says, outright, that time itself is negotiable? On the surface, Hermione's third year looks just like canon, an impossible timetable. Ancient runes, and arithmancy, and care of magical creatures, all somehow happening at the same hour. But in this world, with Voldemort never truly gone, and the war simmering in every prophet headline, her overburdened schedule isn't just about ambition, it's about armor. Every subject is another shield she can raise between Harry and the prophecy, between their fragile, extraordinary bond and the darkness she knows is still organizing in the shadows. So when Professor McGonagall pulls her aside and presses the tiny hourglass into her hand, the moment hits different. In canon, it's a clever school solution. Here, it feels like the system itself, choosing a rule worshipper to carry a weapon of pure disobedience. Hermione, who color codes her notes and flinches at the idea of a library book overdue by a day, now walks the corridors with time in her pocket. This isn't a story about a quirky timetable hack. This is a story about giving the most conscientious girl in Hogwarts the power to say, with terrifying clarity, that the rules of cause and effect are not absolute. And of course, Harry notices. He sees the shadows under her eyes, the way she sags for a heartbeat when she thinks no one is looking, the way she always appears exactly where he needs her. We're exploring a version of Prisoner of Azkaban where his concern is not just friendly, it is sharpened by the knowledge that his parents are alive somewhere out there, still in hiding, still at risk. If time can be bent, if hours can be stolen back, what does that mean for them? The answer arrives with Buckbeak's sentence and Sirius's impending kiss. In the hospital wing, when Dumbledore's eyes flick to the clock and he hints at more than one innocent life, Harry and Hermione don't stumble into the rescue. They choose it. They look at each other and understand, without speaking, that this is the line. They will break time to save lives. The flight to Hagrid's hut, the stone shattering the window, Buckbeak's desperate beating wings. Those beats stay faithful to canon, but the emotional architecture shifts when Harry watches himself across the lake and realizes he is the one who casts the stag. It is not just a revelation about his father, it is a revelation about agency. The future he thought was fixed is, suddenly, something he can reach back and rewrite, and Hermione is right there, hand on his shoulder, grounding him. She has just violated every instinct she lives by, not for extra credit, but for love and justice over the Ministry's brittle idea of order. Most importantly, they do it together. When they race Sirius to freedom, when they slip back into their beds seconds before discovery, they return with more than a saved hippogriff and a living godfather. They return with a dangerous new belief. That time is not a locked corridor, but a series of doors that might, under the right pressure, open for two teenagers haunted by a living Dark Lord and a prophecy that still hangs over Harry's head. That realization is intoxicating and terrifying. Because if time can be changed once, Hermione whispers later, almost to herself, maybe it can be changed again, her words echoing over the cold gleam of a prophecy sphere in the Department of Mysteries, still unbroken, still waiting. What if you don't want to be the chosen one anymore? That prophecy sphere is waiting, but Harry is the one who can't wait anymore. Because what if the real betrayal of canon isn't Peter's? What if the real betrayal is that we all accepted, without blinking, that Harry never got to choose whether he wanted to be the chosen one at all? So we pull back from the Department of Mysteries and drop into something quieter. A late summer evening at the Burrow, the sky washed in Weasley sunset gold, gnomes rustling in the garden. Harry is sitting on the back steps with a butterbeer going warm in his hand, listening to the chaos inside. Molly scolding, Arthur laughing, Ginny and the twins arguing over something explosive. It should be perfect. It almost is. Except every adult conversation he overhears bends, eventually, toward him. The Order needs Harry ready. The Ministry wants Harry visible. Dumbledore needs Harry protected, but prepared. Even James, pacing with Sirius in the kitchen, keeps dropping into that low, urgent voice Harry now recognizes as war talk, and Lily watches him at dinner with eyes that are both soft and measuring, like she is always calculating how much of her little boy is left, and how much of the prophecy is already swallowing him. The crack happens back home, not at the Burrow, but in the quiet of the rebuilt Godric's Hollow kitchen. Remus is there, grading essays at the table, a mug of tea going cold. Lily is washing up with her wand, plates floating, the domestic magic of a life they almost never got to have. Harry stares at the scar he still doesn't have and blurts it out. What if I don't want to be the one who faces him? The plates wobble. Remus's quill stills. It is such a simple sentence, but in this world, it lands like a curse, because they have spent 15 years organizing their fear around the idea that Harry will be ready when the time comes, that he will accept, that he will always do what James would have done. Lily recovers first. She crosses to him, fingers in his hair, voice low and fierce. Of course he doesn't have to rush, of course he's still a child, of course they love him more than any prophecy, but under the reassurance is that tiny, betraying pause, the quick glance she trades with Remus over his shoulder. The look that says, if not him, then who? Remus tries to be gentler, more analytical. The prophecy doesn't say he must hunt Voldemort, only that one cannot live while the other survives. They'll examine every possible interpretation, he promises. They'll find a way to shield Harry from the worst of it, yet even as he speaks, we can feel how deeply he has internalized the story, where Harry is the necessary sacrifice. Harry leaves that conversation more loved, but less free. The first person who doesn't flinch is Hermione. They are in the orchard behind the burrow, lying on an old blanket, pretending to read. Fireflies blink between the trees. Distant laughter drifts from the house. Harry repeats the question, quieter this time, like he's testing whether the world will crack again. I don't know if I want to be him, the chosen one. I don't know if I ever did. Hermione doesn't rush to reassure him. She doesn't quote Dumbledore, doesn't list strategic necessities, doesn't tell him what a hero should do. She just looks at him for a long moment, eyes dark and steady, and asks the most dangerous question in this universe. What do you want, Harry? Not what does the Order need, not what does the prophecy demand. What do you want? He tries to answer and can't, because no one has ever framed it that way. Not the boy who lived, not the weapon, just a boy. Hermione reaches for his hand, their fingers laced together with the ease of long practice, of a bond that has been tested by Dementors and Death Eaters and time itself. You don't owe anyone a destiny, she says. Not even Dumbledore, not even your parents. If you choose to fight him, I'll be there. If you choose not to, I'll still be there. But you have to be honest, with them, with me, with yourself. In canon, Harry's choice is always framed as inevitable courage. Here, we're exploring something more fragile, more human, the possibility that love might ask for a different kind of bravery, the courage to say no to the role the world has written for you, and this is where the story tilts. Because this isn't a story about a boy destined to save the world by default. This is a story about a boy and a girl who might decide to save each other instead, to prioritize their own connection over the grand narrative everyone else believes in. That choice could be something worth fighting for. It could also be something that dooms everyone they love. So when Harry squeezes her hand back, when he whispers that he doesn't know yet, but he wants, for once, to choose with her instead of for everyone else, the stakes of this alternate universe crystallize. What if the greatest threat to Voldemort isn't a prophecy at all, but two teenagers who finally insist on being people before they are symbols? And if they claim that right, what will Dumbledore, the Order, and a still rising Dark Lord do to take it back? The prophecy, reframed, Dumbledore's second reading. Dumbledore feels that insistence, two teenagers demanding to be people first, echoing long after they leave his office, and when the castle is finally quiet, when even the portraits have drifted into their painted dreams, he does something he has avoided for years. He takes out the memory of the prophecy and lowers it into the pensive. What if the words that shaped an entire generation's fear have already fizzled out, not in a single flash of green, but in a long grinding war of attrition? We're exploring a different kind of fulfillment here, one that doesn't fit on chocolate frog cards. As Sybil's voice spills through the office again, born as the seventh month dies, Dumbledore listens not as a general, but as an old man who has watched too many children bleed for a sentence he once treated as strategy rather than warning, marked as his equal. In this world, there is no lightning bolt scar, no boy in a cupboard dreaming of flying. There is a child raised in love, trained deliberately, carrying the psychological mark of being prepared to face Voldemort, but never physically branded. Has the mark become something inward instead, a web of expectations, a childhood organized around constant drills and occlumency and whispered contingency plans? When he finally invites James and Lily to the office, the air is taut. This isn't a story about wise leadership descending from on high. This is a story about three adults admitting they were all, in different ways, afraid. Dumbledore tells them, plainly, how much he once relied on the prophecy to justify impossible choices, how he allowed it to soothe his conscience when he considered Harry as weapon as much as child. James's jaw tightens. Lily's fingers curl white around her teacup. They push back. Harry's life, James insists, cannot be organized around a riddle that might already be obsolete. Lily goes further. She deconstructs the wording like an arithmancy problem. Marked as his equal, she says, could mean Voldemort's own choice to see Harry as rival, to fear him, to shape him. Power the Dark Lord knows not might never have been a single climactic spell. Maybe it was love, yes, but also knowledge, collective resistance, the way the Marauders and the Order, and even terrified Hogwarts students stood together. Maybe the prophecy has been fulfilled in a diffuse, non-mythic way, bled out over a decade of small defiance. Harry is there for part of this, silent in a corner armchair, feeling the floor tilt. His entire childhood, every extra lesson, every hushed argument he half overheard suddenly reframes itself around a prophecy that might no longer apply. If Voldemort can be worn down by many, if no single duel decides the future, then what is he? Not the chosen one, just a boy who is prepared to be. Later, when he tells Hermione, her shoulders actually drop. She is relieved by the demystification of fate, fascinated by the magical mechanics of prophecy. In a late-night, low-voiced conversation in the common room, they circle the same question from opposite sides. Is meaning something you're given or something you choose? If no sentence in a smoky room ever named them, would their bond, their love, their choices be any less extraordinary, any less something worth fighting for? By dawn, Dumbledore has made another choice. He will not reveal the full prophecy to the wider world. The wizarding world, he decides, needs less fatalism and more agency. Yet, as Harry watches the first light touch the lake, he can't help wondering, is ignoring prophecy an act of freedom, or a different kind of dangerous hubris, one that might yet demand a price we haven't imagined? A world without a boy who lived, politics, power, and memory. The wizarding world wakes up from that night by the lake and does what it always does when it's afraid. It tells itself a story. But what if, in a world where Voldemort never fell and Harry never became the boy who lived, that story has no single shining protagonist to cling to? Walk through the Ministry atrium in this timeline and you feel it immediately. There is no golden statue of a child on a broom, no frozen miracle of a baby who defeated death. Instead, the fountain is flanked by dark, polished stone, carved with hundreds of names, Aurors, hit wizards, healers, muggleborns, werewolves who fought with the Order, goblins who leaked Gringotts intel, even a pair of squibs who ran a safe house. The war here is remembered as a collective act of endurance, not the triumph of an infant legend. This isn't a story about one chosen savior. This is a story about everyone who kept showing up, and yet, in that very refusal to crown a single hero, something more subtle takes root. Cornelius Fudge still rises, still wraps himself in green robes and self-importance, but without a boy who lived to stand beside in photo ops, he has no effortless symbol of hope to borrow. So he leans harder into what bureaucrats always love: stability, procedure, denial. The plaques exist, but the speeches that unveil them are bloodless. The unfortunate incidents are framed as isolated, regrettable episodes, not proof that the Ministry failed to see Voldemort's first ascent for what it was. If no one baby saved them, then no one minister failed them either. Responsibility dissolves into paperwork. Into that vacuum, a different force pushes. We're exploring a world where the people who actually bled in the war are still young enough to remember the smell of burning homes, and old enough to sit on Wizengamot benches. A reformist bloc begins to crystallize around names we half know from canon. Emmeline Vance, arguing for independent Auror oversight, so no one can weaponize the department like Barty Crouch did. A surprisingly fierce Hestia Jones drafting werewolf protections with Remus at her side. Kingsley Shacklebolt quietly building anti-pure-blood nepotism rules into hiring codes. Without a mythic savior, they argue, the only protection is structure, transparency, law. It's less romantic. It is, in their eyes, something worth fighting for, but absence cuts both ways. Pure-blood supremacists have no scarred boy to hate, no prophecy child to obsess over, no nursery rhyme of their defeat, so their resentment becomes colder, more ideological. They go underground not as a shattered cult fixated on one failed murder, but as a network of families, investments, and charitable foundations. Harder to track because there is no single symbol to watch for. Most importantly, this makes the danger feel diffuse. You can't point to one dark mark on one child's forehead and say, "There, that's where the story turns." The Daily Prophet, of course, cannot stand this complexity, so one autumn, a glossy Sunday supplement hits every breakfast table. The couple who saved us all, James and Lily on the cover, wands raised, backlit like poster icons. The article tries to retrofit a central legend, to turn the Potters into the axis of the war. It highlights Godric's Hollow raids they thwarted, the informants they ran, the way Voldemort's attention bent toward them and away from others. It wants, desperately, to give the public a clean, cinematic arc, and then, in the final paragraphs, James and Lily ruin it. James insists on naming Moody, Marlene McKinnon, Fabian and Gideon Prewett, Dorcas Meadows, Mary MacDonald, Muggle parents who hid children they didn't understand. Lily talks about the Longbottoms, about Alice's courage under Cruciatus, about how no one owl ever changed the war, only thousands of small, terrified choices. They reject the framing, on record. They say they were one thread in a tapestry, not the tapestry. The article lands like a stone dropped in uncertain water. Some readers feel stirred, even liberated by the idea that heroism is shared. Others feel cheated, frustrated. Where is their neat story, their boy who lived, their proof that love in one nursery was enough to break the darkness forever? Upstairs at Godric's Hollow, Harry finishes the article and just sits there, the newspaper crackling in his hands. He is 13, or 14, or 15, and he has heard whispers, prophecies Dumbledore chose not to center, nights when his parents' voices dropped after they thought he was asleep. As he reads, something clicks with quiet, unsettling force. In another version of the world, he realizes that headline would have been about him. His name would have filled those plaques with a different kind of meaning. His scar, if he had one, would have been the axis of every political argument, every prophet op-ed, every fudge press conference. He feels relief like a breath he didn't know he was holding. No crowds, no expectations, no destiny written into his skin. And yet, there is also a small, guilty ache, a longing for the clarity of being the center of a legend, of knowing without question that his existence meant something extraordinary. What if, he wonders, staring at his perfectly ordinary reflection in the window, the world needs a symbol so badly that it will carve one out of him anyway, boy who lived or not. Sirius Black, notorious godfather, fame, freedom, and restlessness. If the world is already searching for a symbol, who does it seize instead of the boy who lived? In this timeline, the answer steps onto the page with a bark of laughter and a leather jacket slung over Auror robes. Sirius Black becomes the headline the prophet can't stop printing. Ex-Black heir turned blood traitor, war hero who hunted Death Eaters through the smoke of Diagon Alley. Star Auror, whose disciplinary file is as thick as his fan mail. To the public, he is the man who spat in the eye of a dark legacy and lived to tell the tale. The notorious godfather who carries a baby Harry Potter on his shoulders at Quidditch matches while cameras flash like hexes. No boy who lived? Fine, they'll build their legend around the man who refused to die. But what if behind every dazzling interview and dramatic courtroom testimony, there is something more fragile? We're exploring a Sirius who has everything canon denied him: freedom, fame, family, and who still cannot sleep through the night. He knows the names of every Order member who did not make it to this quieter decade. He remembers the way Marlene fell, the way Dorcas didn't answer her Patronus, the way the Longbottoms were wheeled past him in St. Mungo's, eyes vacant. The war ended without the clean break of Voldemort's fall, without the myth of a baby's impossible victory. So what, exactly, did they win? This isn't a story about a carefree rock star godfather. This is a story about a man who only ever knew himself in opposition to something monstrous, and who now walks through peacetime like it's an ill-fitting costume. Without Voldemort as a visible enemy, he throws himself into being Harry's favorite adult with the same reckless intensity he once reserved for duels. He buys Harry a broom a year too early, teaches him secret passageways before Lily is ready, turns detentions into private jokes. Part godfather, part older brother, part living warning of what happens when you let anger steer your life. James rolls his eyes. Lily sets boundaries. Harry glows in the attention and absorbs the lesson that rules are, at best, suggestions. When McGonagall sends an owl about Harry questioning Ministry-approved history, James suspects Sirius. He's right, because Sirius doesn't just haunt the Auror office, he storms Hogwarts as well. In Harry's third year, Dumbledore invites him to give a guest lecture on defensive magic. The Great Hall hums as he strides in, hair loose, wand tucked behind his ear. He demonstrates shield charms that shimmer like glass, disarms 3 seventh years in a blur, then, almost casually, mentions the curses the Ministry refuses to name in textbooks. He talks about what it means to hesitate when someone you love is on the other end of your wand. He does not sanitize. He will not. The students are electrified. The next day, the prophet runs a politely outraged column about irresponsible glorification of combat. A memo arrives at the Auror office. Sirius laughs it off in public. Of course he does, but we see the way his jaw tightens when no one is looking. If the Ministry wants a mascot, they'll have to accept the scars that come with him. Most importantly, his fame throws Remus into sharper relief. The werewolf who fought beside him receives no fan mail, no howlers of adoration, only wary glances and employment rejections. Sirius uses every interview to say Remus's name, to demand reform, to insist that they survive together, yet sometimes, in his urgency, he speaks for Remus instead of with him, promising changes Remus hasn't agreed to, narrating a pain that isn't his to narrate. Their friendship holds, but it strains. Quietly, in the spaces between causes and conversations. What if allyship, even born of love, can still wound when it refuses to listen? And then, the nights out end. The pub closes. The crowd disperses. Sirius apparates home to a flat scattered with dog hair and old photographs. He drops into a chair, the room still spinning faintly with fire whiskey and applause, and takes up a worn picture of 4 boys grinning in the Hogwarts sunshine. James, with his arms slung around his shoulders. Remus, half smiling. Peter, small and bright, caught mid-laugh. In canon, this photo would be a graveyard. Here, they are all technically alive. Yet Sirius stares at Peter's face like it's a question he has never quite stopped asking. The war is over. Voldemort is diminished, but not destroyed. The Ministry is stable, but not just. Harry is safe, but restless. So why does Sirius feel like he is waiting on a precipice again? He traces the edge of the photograph with his thumb and realizes, with a cold, clear jolt, that without a catastrophe to fight, he has no idea who he is allowed to be. Is he a hero, a relic, a warning, or a weapon simply waiting for someone to point? And if the world still needs a symbol, how long before it demands that he bleed for it again? Remus Lupin in the light, quiet revolutions, and old wounds. The classroom is dim, except for wand light and the pale, silvery shimmer of a shield charm hanging in the air like a held breath. Remus Lupin walks through it as if through mist, robes whispering, voice low but clear as he asks, "Not, can you cast it stronger? But what are you protecting yourself from? And why?" We're exploring a Hogwarts where defense against the dark arts is not just technique, but conscience, where the man at the front of the room has survived both war and childhood curse and refuses to separate the two. One moment, he is correcting Harry's stance, nudging his elbow. The next, he is asking the whole class why fear so easily becomes hatred, why the language of necessary harm sounds so persuasive when the target is someone you already fear. This isn't a story about a tragic professor who drifts in for a single year and disappears. This is a story about what if Remus Lupin actually stays. Dumbledore secures a waiver. The Potters throw their name and gold and quiet, relentless influence behind him, and year after year, Remus simply remains. He is there when first years flinch at the word werewolf, when parents complain in howlers, when the prophet runs its thinly veiled hit pieces. He is still there 3, 5, 10 years later, when those same students correct their parents at dinner, when Professor Lupin is spoken with respect instead of caution, and yet the laws do not move so easily. The Ministry registry still brands him, employment restrictions remain, silver ink on parchment in some distant office still declares him dangerous. The institution shifts like stone, slowly, grudgingly, never quite enough. In the staff room, McGonagall argues with visiting inspectors. In the corridors, children whisper that their favorite teacher is the monster the pamphlets warned them about. Remus feels every whisper. He is grateful, always, for James's effortless loyalty, for Lily's meticulous legal briefs, for Sirius's loud, reckless support, but gratitude curdles at the edges when he realizes he has become a symbol, a good werewolf, a safe exception. Any mistake in class, any snapped remark on a bad full moon week, back, and he can see it in certain eyes. There, you see, we were right. Most importantly, he fears that even his smallest failure will not just condemn him, but every nameless werewolf who will never be invited to teach at Hogwarts. So he over-prepares, he over-listens, he overthinks. With Harry, that vigilance softens into something more profound. Harry looks at him and sees not a case study, but a man who knew his parents, who laughs with Sirius on the lawn, who makes tea in the staff kitchen at midnight and admits quietly that courage can mean staying instead of charging in. Remus becomes a model of masculinity that is thoughtful, gentle, fiercely competent. When Harry's temper spikes, when his scar aches with a prophecy he never asked for, Remus is the one who asks, "What do you want to become?" Not just what do you want to defeat. With Hermione, the bond is different, but just as extraordinary. He gives her hard questions, not easy praise. He treats her as a colleague in training, pushing her beyond perfect recall into ethical argument, into asking who writes laws and who benefits. In canon, she finds SPEW alone. Here, late nights in his office, with piles of case law and ministry decrees, turn her outrage into precision. Harry watches the two of them debate precedent and principle, and his admiration for her sharpens into something deeper, something worth fighting for. The outside world notices. Eventually, the Ministry cannot keep its hearings on werewolf regulations entirely theoretical when Hogwarts' own professor is sitting in the Great Hall. Remus is summoned to testify. He arrives in his best robes. Lily charmed the frayed cuffs smooth, Sirius joked about hexing the committee, and sits beneath the cold glow of enchanted windows that show a sanitized sky. We'll examine this moment closely, because it is one of those quiet turning points that never make the history books. Remus does not rage. He does not beg. He speaks. Calmly, devastatingly, about a childhood carved around full moons, about employment doors that closed before he could even knock, about wolfsbane that exists in theory, but not in budgets. He describes, with surgical precision, how fear has been codified into law. He answers questions that are really accusations with patience that feels like both grace and self-erasure. For a few suspended minutes, the room actually listens. Even the stenographer's quill seems to hesitate. Then, inevitably, the amendments are revised, provisions are postponed for further study. The most meaningful protections are excised in committee. What passes is better than nothing, worse than justice. Remus walks out with his back straight and his hands shaking. He is proud. He is bitter. He has done everything right, and the world has smiled, nodded, and chosen comfort over change. That night, he climbs the astronomy tower with Sirius. The castle sprawls below them, lit windows like constellations fall into earth. Sirius is pacing, words sharp, railing about cowards in plum robes, about how they fought a war, so the next generation wouldn't have to sit through hearings that protect no one. Remus leans on the cold stone, eyes on the grounds where students drift back from the greenhouses, from Quidditch practice, from the library where Harry and Hermione are probably bent over some impossible essay together. He listens to Sirius rage, lets it wash over him like wind. What if this is all we ever get? Sirius demands. Half measures and handshakes? Remus is quiet for a long moment. When he speaks, his voice is almost too soft for the night air. Then we hold this line, he says, and we hope they push it further. He hesitates, the admission tasting like defeat and faith at once. I'm afraid, Pads, afraid that Harry's generation will have to finish what we started. That all we've done is buy them time. Sirius turns, ready to argue, then follows his gaze down to the tiny figures on the lawn, to the boy who lived with his parents, yet still carries a prophecy, to the girl who has found in her professor an intellectual equal, and in her best friend a partner. The wind cuts colder, the stars feel closer, because if the Marauders have become symbols, whether they like it or not, the question hanging over the tower is simple and merciless. What will Harry, Hermione, and their friends do with the world they inherit, especially when Voldemort has not fallen, only learned to move in shadows? Peter Pettigrew's quiet redemption, the weight of a choice, not made down in the Ministry's lower levels, far from the grand atriums and gilded offices, a single desk lamp burns late. Quills scratch, files float, and in the middle of it all sits Peter Pettigrew, clerk in the improper use of magic office, part-time liaison to the Order's peacetime network, full-time shadow to legends. What if the man canon taught us to fear as a traitor never broke at all, but simply stayed, not as a roaring hero like Sirius, not as a wounded scholar like Remus, not as a golden Quidditch god like James, but as the one who remembers who needs an extra cloak, who tracks which ex-Death Eater met which contact in which dingy pub. This isn't a story about a spectacular redemption arc. This is a story about a quiet one. Among the Marauders, Peter is still Wormtail, still at the edge of every photograph. James laughing, Sirius dramatic, Remus thoughtful, and Peter a little blurred, a little off-center, but always there. At order gatherings, he pours tea, he runs messages, he listens. People underestimate him. They always have. That becomes his greatest weapon, because when the war supposedly ends and Voldemort retreats into whispers, Death Eater cells do not simply vanish. They reconfigure, they go underground. And Peter, with his talent for observation and logistics, starts noticing patterns no one else sees. The repeated name in a ledger, the owl that always flies at midnight, the way 3 unconnected incidents trace a triangle on a map of Britain. But under all of that competence, there is something fractured. At night, Peter dreams of screaming green light over Godric's Hollow, of his own hand offering up an address, of James's voice breaking as he realizes who betrayed him. He wakes shaking, heart racing, with images he cannot explain. How do you confess nightmares of a life you never lived? How do you admit that in some deep, terrifying part of you, the choice to betray feels horribly plausible? We're exploring a man who looks at his friend's trust and feels both warmed and accused by it. Dumbledore sees this. Of course he does. One evening, in a quiet Hogwarts office, smelling of lemon drops and wood polish, he invites Peter to sit. "You are afraid," Dumbledore says gently, "of what you might have become." Peter laughs, brittle. "What if you're trusting the wrong man, Professor? What if there's something broken in me?" Dumbledore's eyes are very old, very kind. "Then we shall place you where trust is required, and see if love can mend what fear imagines. Most importantly, I do not believe people are only the worst choices they might have made." He gives Peter responsibility, not punishment, coordinating safe houses, arranging witness protection for vulnerable Muggle-born families, cross-referencing ministry raids with whispered rumors from Nocturne Alley, preventative grace, weaponized as strategy. To the public, the victories belong to Aurors with famous names. To the Marauders, they belong to the friend who always has the right file, the right address, the right warning a day before disaster. Harry grows up calling him Uncle Wormtail, half teasing, half affectionate. As a child, he ranks the Marauders in the obvious way: Dad the hero, Sirius the rebel, Remus the wise one, and Peter, who always seems to be holding the camera instead of starring in the picture, the least impressive. But Hogwarts changes that. Harry notices that when a frightened second-year Muggleborn needs a quiet escort home after a threatening letter, it's Peter who volunteers. When James and Sirius argue over a reckless plan, it's Peter who quietly sides with Remus and insists they think it through. When an anonymous tip prevents a Death Eater resurgence in the north, Harry overhears Dumbledore thanking Peter by name. Heroism, Harry realizes, is not always a Patronus blazing over a lake. Sometimes it's a man choosing, again and again, not to run. One night, long after a particularly close call, Peter sits alone with the Marauders' map spread across his kitchen table. The parchment glows faintly, Hogwarts pulsing with tiny moving names. Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, Neville Longbottom, threads of a new generation walking corridors he once haunted. His finger traces James Potter in his own memory. Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, ghosts in ink and laughter. His hand trembles. "I will not be him," he whispers to the empty air, the him from his nightmares, the him canon warned us about. Not in this life, not ever. The map stays silent, but the names keep moving together, and Peter Pettigrew sits in the half-light, holding his fear like a vow, choosing, again, to be small, to be loyal, to be something worth fighting for. Harry and Hermione at the crossroads. Fourth year. Without a tournament, the castle is quieter this year. No banners for foreign schools. No enchanted goblet blazing blue-white in the Great Hall, and beneath that quiet, a question hums. What if, without a tournament and without a boy who lived legend, fourth year became less about spectacle and more about who these children are when no one is watching? The Ministry, still bruised from a war that never quite ended, has no appetite for games. They remember giants, raids, and how close Voldemort came to open rule. They do not need photographs of teenagers dodging dragons on the front page of the Prophet, so the Triwizard Tournament stays in the history books, an expensive, dangerous relic. This isn't a story about flaming cups and glory. This is a story about essays, meetings, and the quiet radicalism of who you sit next to in the library. Without the tournament, fourth year at Hogwarts looks almost ordinary from the outside. More homework, more clubs, more evenings where the loudest sound in Gryffindor Tower is the scratch of quills. But we're exploring how that apparent calm becomes a pressure cooker. With Voldemort still rising in the shadows, and the Potters alive, at the heart of the Resistance, every history of magic essay on the last war feels like a mirror held up to the present. Every defense lesson, with a grimmer, battle-tested Lupin, is laced with the unspoken. You may need this, soon. In that space, Harry and Hermione begin to reorient around each other. Study sessions that were once about last-minute revision stretch into midnight conversations about justice and memory. Should the children of known Death Eaters be allowed back into the Auror office? What does it mean that half the school treats war like a story and the other half remembers bodies? Hermione brings moral clarity, case law, citations from obscure Wizengamot rulings. Harry brings lived experience, the way his parents flinch when certain names are said, the way he always notices who is left out of the conversation. When courage meets brilliance, when trauma meets principle, when two people who have already survived the impossible sit shoulder to shoulder over parchment, something more profound starts to take shape. Ron feels it. Of course he does. Without dragons to cheer for, or a maze to get lost in together, there is no external crisis to weld the trio into one unit. Harry's evenings are increasingly split between Marauders' war councils and Hermione's meticulous research. Ron's are split between awkward silences and the nagging sense that the joke has finally landed on him. He is not in the Order meetings. He is not the one James Potter instinctively asks for an opinion. He watches Harry and Hermione debate policy like adults and feels, for the first time, like a child. The symbolic crack comes in October. A box is found in a disused classroom, half buried under broken desks, a cursed ledger from the First War, cataloging Muggleborns and their blood status, humming with dark magic that wants to update itself. When a slur appears in the corridor the next morning, scrawled over a Hufflepuff Muggleborn's bag, Hermione's hands shake, but her voice does not. Harry is at her side before she finishes her first sentence to McGonagall. They move in tandem without speaking, Hermione tracing the enchantment's logic, Harry tracing its emotional fallout, talking to the shaken younger students, insisting that the ledger is evidence, not just a relic. Most importantly, they choose to act, not just react. They propose a student-led forum on Muggleborn safety. They draft questions for the Board of Governors. They argue, together, until Dumbledore agrees to let them see the ledger destroyed. Walking back from the library after that victory, the castle feels different. The air is cold, the hour late, and their hands brush once, twice, then simply stay close. There is a charged silence between them, the awareness that they did something extraordinary and did it together. Harry starts, "Hermione, and he doesn't quite know if the next word will be thank you, or love, or stay. The owl interrupts. Of course it does. A tawny blur dives through the high window, skimming torchlight, landing on Harry's arm with a letter sealed in his mother's hand. Hermione watches his face drain of color as he reads. The war, which had been an essay topic and a ledger in a box, tilts closer. "Harry?" she whispers. He looks up, eyes wide. It's from home. Something's happened, and in that moment, on the edge of confession and catastrophe, their fourth year stops being quiet at all. The spark ignites, from best friends to something else. The common room feels smaller after that letter. The fire pops too loudly, the shadows stretch too far, and the words "something's happened" hang between them like a second, darker ceiling. What if the owl had brought good news? A new charm James wanted to show Harry, a ridiculous story from Sirius, a recipe Lily had finally perfected. In canon, Catastrophe stalks Harry from the cradle. Here, Catastrophe has to work harder. It has to knock on a door that was supposed to stay safe. They retreat to their favorite table in the corner, parchment and ink spreading between them like a battle map. The letter is brief, but brutal. An attack on a former Death Eater who'd reformed, a name Remus recognizes, a neighborhood not far from Godric's Hollow. Voldemort is still rising, still testing, and the Ministry's response is a proposed bill that would track all Muggle-born wands for security. This isn't a story about abstract politics. This is a story about how two fourth years end up dissecting ministry law by candlelight, arguing over precedents Lily mentioned once, cross-referencing dates Hermione drags from memory. We're exploring what happens when love grows in the middle of strategy, when late-night planning sessions become the only place either of them feels entirely understood. Hours later, the ink has dried, and the crisis has been reduced to plans. Harry will write back with questions his parents can take to Dumbledore. Hermione will draft arguments they might slip to sympathetic officials. They'll watch the prophet for patterns. The urgency ebbs. The quiet doesn't. Harry stares at the last sentence of Lily's letter. Be careful what you choose to fight for, and something in him cracks. What if this is all I am? He asks, voice low. A prophecy, a target, some symbol. If Voldemort had gone after Neville, or if Pettigrew had talked, or if my parents had died like they were supposed to in the stories, who would I be? He hasn't said this to James or Lily. He can't. To them, he is their son, their miracle, their second chance. But to Hermione, he can admit the fear that without the Dark Lord, without the boy who lived myth that never quite formed in this world, he might be nothing special at all. Hermione swallows, fingers tracing the edge of the parchment. You'd still be the boy who pulled me onto a broom when I was shaking, the one who always checks if Hagrid's really alright, the one who notices when I've skipped lunch because I'm revising. Her eyes shine, not with tears, but with conviction. You're not a prophecy, Harry. You're you. Then, softer. I'm the one who should be worried about who I am. They can track Muggle-born wands with one bill. They can erase us with one headline. Sometimes I think no matter what we do, people like me will never really belong. He looks at her, really looks, and we feel the shift. The crisis has stripped them down to something more profound than homework partners. He sees the way her eyes light when she finds an argument that might work, the way her hands move when she sketches out protections for others and forgets about herself. She sees the way his first instinct is always to shield everyone else from fear, even if it means carrying more than any 14-year-old should. Their hands brush as they reach for the same quill. They both pull back, then both reach again, laughing too quickly. It's not the first time. Books passed in class, shoulders pressed together over a single textbook, inside jokes about obscure charms that no one else in Gryffindor even pretends to understand. Each tiny contact has been a thread. Tonight, the threads start to feel like a pattern, like inevitability. Ron notices before they do. From the boys' staircase, he watches them bent over the table, heads close, voices low, and something twists in his chest. They'd invited him to stay, to help, but the legal talk had made him feel stupid, and the way they finished each other's thoughts had made him feel extra. He tells himself it's just because they're both swats. He tells himself Harry's his best mate. He tells himself Hermione would never. The denial holds, mostly. Days pass, and the crisis becomes background noise to a subtler tension. In class, Harry catches himself tracking Hermione's movements instead of Moody's demonstration, noticing the way a curl escapes behind her ear when she's concentrating. Hermione, taking notes, becomes aware of how close his knee is to hers under the desk, how his laugh finds her first, even when someone else made the joke. Ron cracks comments to cut through the silence, but his eyes flick between them, measuring distances that used to feel effortless. Most importantly, this isn't a story about a sudden, dramatic confession. It's about a slow tilt of gravity, a shared glance when Percy drones on about the new bill, a murmured, "You all right?" when Harry stares too long at an article about the attack. A hand on a shoulder that lingers half a second too long. The night their plans finally bear fruit, a small clause slipped into the bill that limits its reach. A quiet note from Lily saying, "We did it, at least a little." They end up alone in the common room again. Ron has gone to bed early, after a strained game of chess, muttering about homework. The fire is low, the tower hushed, they're giddy with relief. Harry reads Lily's line aloud, and Hermione laughs, bright and unguarded. "See?" she says. "We can change things." "You changed it," he answers, and it comes out rougher than he expects. "You always do." Silence drops between them, not empty, but charged. They're standing closer than they need to be, the letter forgotten on the table, the fire painting gold on Hermione's hair. Harry becomes acutely aware of her, of the way her breathing has hitched to match his, of the warmth of her hand still resting near his. What if? He starts, and doesn't know how to finish. What if we're something else? What if this is love? What if crossing this line changes everything? Ron, his parents, the war, the fragile balance they've built. Hermione looks up, eyes wide, and for a heartbeat they both lean in. It's not planned, it's not grand, it's just the most natural thing in the world. Two people who have carried the same fear and the same hope all night moving toward the same answer. Their noses almost brush. Harry can see the tiny freckle at the corner of her mouth. Hermione's fingers curl, as if she's about to reach for him. And then, the portrait hole swings open. Harry? Hermione? Ron's voice, rough with sleep and something else, cuts through the moment. He freezes when he sees them, too close, too still. For a second, three friends hang in the same stunned silence, each of them realizing, on different levels, what almost happened. The spell breaks. Hermione steps back so fast, her chair scrapes. Harry straightens, heat flooding his face. Ron blinks, mouth opening and closing around a joke that won't come. We were just, Harry starts. Planning, Hermione blurts at the same time. Right, Ron says too quickly. Course you were. They say goodnight like nothing has changed. But as Hermione climbs the girls' staircase, her hand pressed hard over her racing heart, and Harry lies awake staring at the hangings of his bed, and Ron stares at the ceiling, wondering when he started feeling like the odd one out. We know the truth. Something has changed. Something has begun. And now that the spark is lit, how long can they pretend they don't see the fire? This isn't a story about fate, choosing each other, anyway. Something has begun. But what is it, really, when the lights go out and the castle settles, and there's no one to perform for except your own thoughts? On the Quidditch pitch the next afternoon, Harry flies harder than he needs to. The air is cold, the sky wide, and he keeps replaying that near kiss in the common room as if it were a match he can still influence. Was it an accident of proximity, of late hour and frayed nerves? Or was it the inevitable crest of a tide that's been rising since a time-turner night and a silver stag? In a world where he is not the chosen one, where no prophecy has carved his path in stone, he finds himself asking a quieter, more frightening question. If nothing is written for him, is he finally allowed to choose something for himself? Hermione, meanwhile, is in the library, surrounded by war-era legislation and case law on the Fidelius charm, and absolutely failing to absorb a single line. Her mind keeps circling back, the way his breath had hitched, the way her name had sounded in that half-inch of space between them. She interrogates it like an arithmancy problem. Is she overreading a moment? Is this just adrenaline, proximity, the pressure of research and danger? Or is this actually something simple and human that she's trying to complicate because that's safer than admitting she's in love with her best friend? Notice how both of them reach for the language they know. Harry measures by prophecy and permission. Hermione measures by logic and precedent. And because this isn't a story about fate handing them to each other, we're exploring what it looks like when two people have to step past their own frameworks and speak. They finally do it in an empty classroom, late, when the corridors are echoing and the portraits are half asleep. It's awkward. It's halting. There are too many apologies and not enough eye contact at first. Harry stumbles through. About last night, and Hermione blurts, "We should clarify expectations," and they both wince, because who talks about a near kiss like it's a ministry contract? But then it steadies. They admit the fear of ruining their friendship, of breaking the trio when Voldemort is still rising, of introducing one more variable into a world already off balance because Peter Pettigrew chose loyalty and the prophecy never fully activated. They say out loud that no dusty orb in the Department of Mysteries says they belong together. There's no canon script. This is a story about choosing, not being chosen. So they choose, deliberately, carefully. They agree they will not pretend it was a fluke. They will explore it, step by step, even if the world never offers them perfect safety, even if war and reform and marauder legacies crowd every horizon. Most importantly, they promise that if it ever hurts more than it heals, they will talk, not hide. Their early love is not fireworks over the Black Lake. It's quieter, something more profound. It's hands brushing under the table and not moving away. It's parchment notes that begin with citations on Fidelius law and end with, "You need to sleep," and "You're not alone in this." The first real kiss comes not with dramatic music, but in a tucked-away corner of the library, between shelves on magical contracts and post-war trials, and it feels less like a revelation and more like finally stepping into a room that has always been there. We end this moment with them side by side at a library table, books open on war-era legislation and future reforms, fingers intertwined right on the page. Their romance frames itself as part of a project, not just to survive Voldemort's unfallen regime, but to remake the world together into something worth fighting for. And if love is a choice, not a destiny, what happens when the war demands even harder choices next? James and Lily react, parents, partners, and the past they never lived. And here's where the war outside collides with the war inside a family. We've watched Harry and Hermione build this extraordinary, deliberate bond, turning late-night research into a shared mission, turning fear into something more profound. But what happens when that quiet, fiercely private connection has to step into the light of the people who were never meant to live this long? What if the first real test of their love isn't Voldemort, but James and Lily Potter at the Christmas table? Harry tells them himself. Of course he does. It's during a rare holiday where the Fidelius feels almost like a blessing instead of a cage. Snow pressing against the windows, Sirius arguing with the wireless, Remus grading essays in the corner. James notices first the way Harry and Hermione orbit each other in the cramped kitchen, how their hands brush and then don't quite move away, how Hermione refills Harry's pumpkin juice without asking. He catches Lily's eye. They've been here before. James's reaction hits in layers. On the surface, it's teasing, a lopsided grin, and so, Evans, looks like our boys got your taste in terrifyingly clever partners. But under that, there's a flash of protectiveness that has nothing to do with house points or Quidditch bravado. He remembers being 17 and invincible, trying to fold a war and a romance and a friendship with Sirius into the same reckless charge. He remembers the arrogance of believing love would always survive whatever you threw at it, and he looks at Harry and thinks, I will not let you make my mistakes in the same order. Lily's response is quieter, more layered. She already loves Hermione's mind, the way this girl challenges Dumbledore in meetings, and then apologizes to the tea tray for slamming it down. She sees how Hermione studies Harry, how their connection actually calms his temper instead of inflaming it. But she also sees the weight on her son's shoulders, the half-spoken prophecy, the way Dumbledore keeps preparing him, the way the world keeps asking for more from the child they never got to raise in canon. A relationship inside that pressure cooker could be sanctuary, or it could be another expectation he feels he has to carry perfectly. So Lily asks Hermione to walk with her, just once around the garden under the shimmering edge of the Fidelius. This isn't a story about suspicion, this is a story about boundaries. Lily tells her, very plainly, that she is not stealing Harry from Ron, from the Order, from whatever destiny Dumbledore thinks he has mapped out. She talks about ambition, about not shrinking her own brilliance to fit into Harry's shadow, about the danger of defining herself only through someone else's battles. Hermione, who has always feared being too much and not enough at the same time, actually breathes easier. Parallel to that, James pulls Harry into the old study that still smells like ink and broom polish. We're exploring a man confronting his own reflection in his son. James admits the arrogance, the tunnel vision, the way he once treated Lily as both partner and prize. He tells Harry that Hermione is not just someone to shield or lean on when the nightmares get too loud. She is a strategist, a leader, a person with her own war to fight. If you can't treat her as equal in the mission, he says, you don't deserve her in the quiet. When they emerge, there's a moment, small, fragile, absolutely decisive. James and Lily share a look over the top of their mugs, an entire lifetime of what-ifs in one silent conversation. They cannot control this. They will not try. Instead, they choose to trust the two teenagers in front of them to equip rather than direct. Lily squeezes Hermione's shoulder as she passes. James slings an arm around Harry and pointedly makes room on the sofa for one more. In that domestic, almost boring scene, the Potters finally fully welcome Hermione into the family. Most importantly, that choice changes how the next sacrifices will be made. Because if love is now part of the strategy, not a distraction from it, what happens when the war demands a price that their bond might not survive? Ron Weasley and the shape of a different future. If love is part of the strategy now, then someone has to ask, what happens to the person who always thought he was part of that strategy too? Ron hears the news not in some grand cinematic moment, but in the cramped Gryffindor common room, with rain at the windows and homework on the tables. Harry and Hermione, official, together. The word lands like a bludger to the chest. His ears burn, his stomach twists, and beneath the hot spike of anger, there is something colder, more dangerous. The sting of realizing that, in this version of the story, he is no longer the other point of the triangle. He is the friend on the edge of the photograph. He lashes out, of course, a sharp comment about them keeping secrets, a bitter joke about Potter and his personal minister for magic. We recognize the canon echoes, but there's a difference here. In a world where the Potters live, where Sirius and Remus are in and out of Grimmauld Place, like it's a revolving door, Ron is not just jealous of love, he is furious at the sense that there is now a whole orbit, James, Lily, the Marauders, the Order in the Open, that he will never quite belong to. Back at the Burrow, the Weasley family becomes the crucible for that hurt. Molly clucks over him, makes extra sausages, calls Harry dear, but keeps glancing at Ron's face as if she can stitch his heart back together with shepherd's pie. Arthur is quieter. He sits with Ron late one night, oil on his hands from tinkering with a Muggle radio, and tells him that friendships change, that love rearranges people, that this isn't a story about being replaced, but about learning where you stand when the people you love grow in directions you didn't expect. The twins tease, obviously, should have patented the Weasley Granger idea, Ickle Ronnikins. But then, in a rare moment of stillness, Fred says that no one ever handed them an identity, they had to build it. You want out of Harry's shadow? George adds. Cast your own. And slowly, Ron realizes that his resentment isn't actually about Hermione's hand in Harry's. It's about watching his best friends get pulled into something larger. The Potters' war councils, Dumbledore's half-explained plans, order meetings he's too young to attend, while he stays behind with homework and howlers. He feels left, not just out, but behind. So what if this is where his path forks? At Hogwarts, he leans into the one arena where he has always been extraordinary, strategy. Chess Club stops being a joke and becomes a laboratory. He starts analyzing battle reports from the First War, replaying them like matches, seeing patterns no one else notices. McGonagall, watching him reconstruct the Department of Mysteries fight on a board with enchanted pieces, quietly suggests Auror work or tactical planning for the Order. In another thread of this AU, he spends weekends with George, testing shield charm fireworks and decoy detonators, realizing that clever mischief can be something more profound, real-world defense, real protection. The reconciliation has to happen, or the trio we love fractures beyond recognition. One evening, in the room of requirement, with the castle humming around them, Ron finally says it, that he felt like a sidekick in his own life. Harry apologizes for disappearing into Potter family plans without pulling Ron in. Hermione apologizes for assuming he'd just be fine, for not seeing how the new bond looked from the outside. They admit the obvious, the three of them will never be exactly the same, but they also make a quieter promise. This is a story about staying, about choosing to remain in each other's lives, even when the roles have shifted. We end the year with Ron standing not beside Harry, but slightly apart, in front of a notice board. He's organizing a defensive strategy group, or signing his name to Auror apprenticeship forms, without waiting to ask what Harry is doing. For the first time, his choice is not a reaction, it is a declaration, and that changes the board for the war to come. Because if Ron Weasley stops seeing himself as the comic relief and starts acting like a strategist, what does that do to Voldemort's carefully laid plans? The Second Wave, Neo-Death Eaters, and the Politics of Resentment. Ron's declaration changes the board for the war to come, but a board is more than its players. It's the rules, the history, the pressure that has been building for years, while Voldemort remains a shadow rather than a fallen tyrant. What if the wizarding world, in clinging to the illusion of peace, has been quietly preparing the ground for something darker than a single Dark Lord's return? Because this isn't a story about one madman and his followers. This is a story about what grows in the cracks when a society refuses to heal. The Ministry has spent years pretending the First War is over, filing it away as an unfortunate chapter. There are commemorations, yes, and plaques with too many names, but there are also pureblood families who kept their gold, their influence, their seats on key committees. Economic inequality deepens, Muggle-borns still hit invisible ceilings, and half measures masquerade as reform. Most importantly, the boy who lived myth never arrives to force a reckoning. Into that vacuum steps a second wave, not Death Eaters, not yet. A charismatic pureblood intellectual, Cassian Selwyn, begins publishing essays in obscure journals about the preservation of magical culture, about how canon history has been distorted by hysterical Muggle-born narratives. A bitter war orphan, Elspeth Roll, raised in a crumbling house, paid for with a small, grudging pension, seethes at the ministry that left her parents' killers untried, and a disillusioned insider in magical law enforcement, Marlowe Burke, watches corrupt superiors bury evidence of ongoing sympathizer networks, and decides that if the system is rigged, then only power matters. We're exploring a movement that has read Voldemort like a failed prototype. No dark mark, no giants rampaging through villages, not at first. Instead, they infiltrate. Selwyn takes a visiting lectureship at Hogwarts, framing his rhetoric as academic debate. Burke steers Auror priorities away from pureblood extremists and toward Muggle-born fraud. Elspeth organizes quiet meetings in Nocturne Alley, where the old masks are gone, replaced by tasteful black gloves and coded phrases about tradition and security. Harry and Hermione don't meet this threat in a duel, they meet it in footnotes and whispers. Hermione finds anonymous pamphlets slipped between books in the Hogwarts library, elegant little tracts arguing that the Fidelius charm and other high magics should be reserved for those with proven heritage. Harry overhears a hushed argument in a Nocturne shop about the Longbottom precedent and realizes they are treating Neville's family as a cautionary tale, not a tragedy. In the Ministry, during one of their joint research visits, they notice subtle shifts in rhetoric. Internal memos that replace Muggle protection with Muggle risk management. The generational divide is immediate. McGonagall, Remus, even a weary Dumbledore insist that without Voldemort's symbol, there is no real threat, only fringe grumbling. But Harry's cohort, children who grew up with bedtime stories of disappearances and unspoken fear, feel the pattern in their bones. When chaos meets memory, when courage meets analysis, when Harry's instincts meet Hermione's relentless logic, they recognize history rehearsing itself. And then comes the first move. Not a raid on a Muggle-born clinic, not an attack on Hogwarts. A moderate pureblood reformer, Edgar Greengrass, is found in his study, wand intact, wards untouched, mind shattered by a curse no one can identify. On his desk, a single elegant card. For those who forget that tradition is something worth fighting for, the new enemy has made its opening statement, quiet, precise, and very, very patient. This is a story about power, Harry and Hermione as reluctant leaders. The room above the Diagon Alley bookshop is too small for the number of chairs squeezed into it, and far too small for the weight of expectation pressing toward the couple at the front. This isn't a story about a chosen one and his clever sidekick. This is a story about what happens when legacy, love, and fear of repeating the past push two teenagers into power they never asked for. They call it the Youth Charter for Magical Reform. Muggle-borns from Hogwarts, apprenticed cursebreakers from Gringotts, a nervous Parkinson cousin who hates what his family says at dinner. And at the center, not because of a prophecy, but because of their names and their relentless visible commitment, stand Harry Potter and Hermione Granger, James and Lily's son, the boy whose parents still host quiet strategy dinners. The Muggle-born witch, who out-argued a Wizengamot clerk at 14. Together, they've become something the older generation can't quite control. We're exploring a different kind of leadership here. Harry leads with presence, with the way he listens like every story matters, with the way his jaw tightens when someone mentions Greengrass's shattered mind. He volunteers for the dangerous trial runs, walks people through defensive drills until his voice goes hoarse. Hermione leads with parchment and precision, with flowcharts of ministry departments, annotated copies of the Statute of Secrecy, contingency plans for when, never if, the new enemy escalates, when chaos meets instinct, when courage meets brilliance, when two people who have actually survived the impossible together stand side by side, the room leans toward them almost automatically, but in private, it feels very different. Their late-night hours in the Potter's kitchen are no longer about revising together or stealing a quiet moment of hand-holding over cocoa. They're about drafting open letters, arguing over whether to demand immediate inquiries into pureblood trusts or push for smaller, winnable protections around Muggle-born property. Harry wants confrontation, public hearings, naming names. Hermione fears backlash, prefers incremental change embedded in procedure. How do you fight an enemy who leaves elegant calling cards without turning the whole world into a battlefield? How do you disagree with the person you love without fracturing the bond that makes you brave enough to fight at all? Most importantly, they both feel the same new terror. If they misstep, if a protest turns violent, or a law backfires, they will have failed together. There will be no comforting fiction that one of them could have done better alone. The Ministry notices, of course it does. One afternoon, they're ushered through polished corridors, past portraits that pretend to sleep. A smiling undersecretary offers advisory badges, a youth council, photo ops in the Prophet, a promise that their energy can help shape responsible reform. It is, transparently, an attempt to draw them close enough to neutralize them. Dumbledore watches from the sidelines, eyes thoughtful, saying almost nothing. James and Lily exchange a glance that says they've seen this dance before. Harry feels the pull of access, of being able to walk into an office and demand answers. Hermione hears the subtext in every carefully chosen phrase. Be reasonable, be patient, be quiet. If they step inside, are they helping change the system from within, or becoming another ornament in the ministry's self-congratulating narrative? Here, their love becomes something more profound than hand-holding in corridors. In the meeting, Hermione senses Harry about to agree too quickly, lays a hand on his arm, and redirects with a pointed question about Greengrass and the untraceable curse. Harry, catching the flicker of doubt in her eyes, backs her play, insisting any advisory role must include full access to certain sealed case files. They move like a single mind under pressure, covering each other's blind spots. Later, back in the safety of the Potter's garden, the cost hits. Harry paces, wondering if they should have taken the offer, tried harder to bend the institution. Hermione's voice shakes as she worries they've just painted targets on their backs. Then the pattern interrupt. A small enchanted leaflet flutters over the hedge, landing between them. It's a call for a student-led march on the ministry, accusing it of complicity in tradition killings, signed by names they recognize from the charter. What if they stay quiet now? What if they endorse it and the march turns deadly? What if they try to moderate it and lose the trust of the very people they've inspired? They read it once, twice. Then, without quite needing words, they arrive at the same terrifying conclusion. They will support the protest, publicly, explicitly, and add their own names to the leaflet, alongside a joint statement accusing the Ministry of protecting pureblood interests over vulnerable families. It is a line they cannot uncross. It will change how the wizarding world sees them forever, not as promising students with famous connections, but as leaders of a movement. As the ink dries on their signatures, as their fingers brush and clasp just a little too tightly, we can feel the axis of this universe tilt. This isn't a story about surviving school anymore. It's about stepping into power, together, and daring to make themselves impossible to ignore. And somewhere in the shadows, the patient enemy takes note and adjusts its plans. Dumbledore steps back, passing the torch before it's too late. Dumbledore is there when it happens, not in the shadows this time, not behind a silencing charm, but seated openly at the back of a packed hall as Harry and Hermione stand before a crowd of students, young Aurors, and idealistic activists. They are speaking without notes, finishing each other's thoughts, arguing policy and principle in the same breath. And for a moment we can feel it. They are occupying the space he once held, only they are doing it together, with a different kind of power. When chaos meets logic, when courage meets brilliance, when two people who have always survived by trusting their bond start inviting everyone else into the conversation instead of waiting for permission, something extraordinary shifts. And Dumbledore, of all people, is the one who notices. He listens as Hermione dismantles the idea of a single chosen one, citing the Longbottom raids, the shattered lives that never made headlines because there was no boy who lived to mythologize. He watches Harry refuse the pedestal, redirecting praise to the Marauders, to the still-living Potters who built safe houses under the Fidelius charm, to nameless families who resisted without prophecy or glory. This is the moment Dumbledore realizes his old narrative has already slipped out of his hands. What if, he thinks, that is actually for the best? In canon, he leaned on the prophecy like a map. He hoarded knowledge, trusted in secrets, treated children and friends as chess pieces on a board only he could see. But here, with Voldemort never fully fallen, with James and Lily alive, and refusing to let their son be a symbol first and a boy second, the old strategy has been quietly dismantled. No boy who lived, no scar as a brand, no clean break between war and peace. The absence of a singular Dark Lord has done something he never anticipated. It has forced him to question whether destiny is an excuse for control, so he starts making changes that, for Albus Dumbledore, feel almost radical. Order meetings shift from tight circles in grim old rooms to broader councils that include Tonks, Kingsley, even 7th-year prefects. He steps down from 2 ministry advisory boards, ignoring the prophet's hand-wringing, and redirects that time to mentoring rather than directing. With Harry and Hermione, he trades instructions for questions. "What do you see that I do not?" he asks, and he waits for the answer. We're exploring a Dumbledore who decides consciously to step back before the story forces him to. One evening in his office, the three of them speak plainly, no twinkling eyes, no riddles. Harry asks, "Is there a plan you're not telling us?" Hermione doesn't look away. Dumbledore breathes in, old habits fighting for air, and finally says, "There are possibilities. There is a prophecy, but this isn't a story about an old man orchestrating a grand design. This is a story about many people making imperfect choices, in the open, together." Harry feels the floor tilt. He loves Dumbledore. He always has. Respect, gratitude, affection, they're all there. But beneath it, something like grief stirs, because if no one is secretly in control, then the weight he and Hermione are carrying is not part of someone else's script. It is theirs, unavoidable, heavy. Hermione reaches for his hand under the desk. He squeezes back, hard. Most importantly, Dumbledore does not respond with comfort. He responds with trust. He rises, crosses to the cabinet behind his desk, and draws out the pensieve, its surface swirling with memories of failed negotiations, early Death Eater meetings, half-heard fragments of the full prophecy. He places the basin between them. "This is not a test," he says quietly. "This is me admitting that the future is no longer mine to interpret, it belongs to you." What if the greatest act of leadership is knowing when to let go? As Harry and Hermione lean over the silver surface, as the room fades and the past rushes up to meet them, we can feel the torch being passed, not cleanly, not perfectly, but in a way that might finally be something more profound than destiny. And somewhere beyond the stone walls of Hogwarts, the patient enemy feels the shift, and begins to look not for a prophecy, but for a partnership. The Potters take a stand: family, risk, and the cost of survival. The world reacts to that shift almost at once. 2 days after Harry and Hermione step out of the pensieve, the Daily Prophet runs with a headline that feels like a slap: "Muggle-born marriages under review, new registry to ensure purity compliance." It's not Azkaban, not open war, but it is the bureaucratic beginning of something we recognize from canon: control, isolation, quiet terror dressed up as policy, and this time, James and Lily are alive to read it over breakfast. The kitchen at Godric's Hollow is too small for what follows. James slams the paper down, tea sloshing over the prophet's smug ink. Lily reads every line twice, lips pressed white. Hermione's hands shake, not for herself, but for her parents. Harry feels that old, familiar burn of helplessness, except now it's mixed with something new. Rage that this is happening while his parents are right here. What if hiding is no longer protection, but complicity? That night, the house doesn't sleep. We're exploring the quiet war before the public one. Whispered arguments in the hallway, doors half closed, voices rising, falling, rising again. James remembers patrols as an Auror, remembers the First War's bodies, the way just one more compromise became a graveyard. Lily remembers being 17 and hearing mudblood echo off stone, remembers Snape's face, remembers choosing love and resistance over survival at any cost. They survived once by vanishing under a Fidelius charm. Can they actually justify disappearing again when their son is already on the front lines? Harry says yes. At first, he says the prophecy still points to him, that this is his fight, that their safety is the one constant in a life Voldemort has always tried to shatter. Hermione, torn, argues both sides in the span of an hour because she knows what targeted parents look like now, not from theory, but from the war that never ended. This isn't a story about reckless bravery, it's about a family trying to decide how much of itself it can risk. The turning point is small, almost mundane. A report comes in, James still has Auror contacts, about a Muggle-born couple relocated after questioning the registry. No trial, no appeal, just absence. James looks at Lily, Lily looks at Hermione. And something in all three of them snaps into alignment. James goes first, because that's who he's always been. He pulls on the old Auror robes, the ones that still carry the faint smell of smoke and St. Mungo's disinfectant, and walks into the ministry not as a fugitive legend, but as a veteran with an unimpeachable record. In a packed Wizengamot session, he stands, cites his service, cites the Fidelius that kept his family alive, and asks the question no one wants on the record. If purity laws worked, why did you need people like me to die for you the first time? The chamber shifts. Some flinch, some listen. Lily chooses a different battlefield. She writes, she speaks, she teaches. A public lecture at Hogwarts on advanced protective charms becomes something more profound, a dismantling of the logic behind purity using lineage charts, spell theory, and her own Muggle-born history. She talks about how the Fidelius charm, invented by a half-blood, saved an old pure bloodline like the Potters. She talks about how love and talent refuse to obey bloodlines. Most importantly, she connects the dots between paperwork and wands pointed at backs. For Harry and Hermione, watching this is equal parts pride and terror. They've always seen James and Lily as the safe center of the storm, the reason their own risks felt survivable. Now, the center is moving. Now, the people who kept Harry hidden are stepping into the same spotlight he's been dragged into since birth. The line between their personal war and the political one blurs until it's almost meaningless. The blow-up comes late, after a rally in Diagon Alley where James speaks and Lily organizes legal aid for Muggle-born families. Harry snaps, voice cracking, "Do you not trust me to handle this? You hid for years, and now, you decide to show up?" It's ugly because it's honest, because buried inside the accusation is a son's fear of losing what he only just learned he could keep. Lily doesn't flinch. "This isn't a story about children cleaning up adults' messes," she tells him, eyes bright. "Last time, we let Dumbledore and the prophecy decide everything. We waited, we hid, we died in every way that mattered. We will not make you do this alone." James, quieter, adds the confession that has haunted him since Halloween that never was. "We waited too long to act last time. We won't wait this time. Not when we can stand beside you." And so they do. The image that follows is almost unbearably cinematic. A marble-floored atrium, enchanted banners protesting the registry, the air buzzing with fear and defiance. At the front of the crowd, James, Lily, Harry, Hermione at Harry's side, fingers threaded through his. Their bond no longer just private comfort, but public declaration. Cameras flash, quills scratch. Somewhere in the shadows, cloaked figures take note. They know, all four of them, that by stepping into the light, they have painted targets on their backs. That the patient enemy they felt stirring in the pensive is watching, adjusting, choosing new angles of attack. But this is a story about choosing to live in truth rather than in hiding, about deciding that love, together, is something worth fighting for even when it makes you visible. As the rally chant swells, as Lily raises her wand not in attack but in luminous solidarity, we can feel the world tilting toward open confrontation. The question now isn't whether the Potters will be targeted, it's who will strike first, and what Harry and Hermione will be forced to sacrifice to keep this fragile, extraordinary family standing. What if the war never really ended, the calm before the break? The chant doesn't echo forever, it fades, leaving something heavier than silence in its wake. Because what if this rally, this luminous moment of unity, is not a victory lap after a war won, but the last deep breath before the plunge? While Lily's light still hangs in the night air over Diagon Alley, in a cellar beneath an abandoned apothecary in Nocturne, 12 figures sit around a warped table. No skull masks, no dark mark displayed, just tasteful black robes, pureblood signet rings, and polite voices discussing restoring order. They don't call themselves Death Eaters. Of course not. They are the children of Walpurgis, the Continuity Circle, the Committee for Traditional Rights. They pass around a list of Muggle-born ministry hires and talk about rebalancing quotas. One of them laughs, soft and cold, when Hermione's name appears. At the ministry itself, a memo slides across a senior official's desk. "Minor disturbance at a fringe gathering." It reads, describing the rally we just left. "No credible threat detected. Recommend de-escalatory language in all public statements." The note about Neo-Death Eater graffiti in 3 separate towns is buried in a footnote. The words pattern and coordinated are carefully absent. The Daily Prophet obliges. Next morning's editorial runs under the headline, "Are the Potters Stirring Up Old Ghosts?" It praises James and Lily's wartime service, then gently scolds them for reckless rhetoric that risks reopening wounds best left to heal. It frames Harry as a troubled boy chasing his parents' legend. It calls Hermione a bright witch who would do well to remember that rapid change often provokes unnecessary backlash. The word Muggle-born never appears. It doesn't have to. At Hogwarts, the children of that editorial whisper in stone corridors. Slytherins pass around hand-copied pamphlets from the Continuity Circle. Hufflepuffs trade rumors about attacks on Muggle-born relatives. In the library, someone has scratched a crude slur into the margin of Hogwarts. A history, and Hermione's hand tightens when she finds it because it's her favorite chapter, because it feels like a message. And then, almost in defiance of all of this, Harry and Hermione steal a night. They end up on the astronomy tower, wrapped in borrowed blankets, a charms textbook between them, and a half-finished plan for a student defense network spread out in messy ink. Above them, the sky is clear. Below them, the castle hums with ordinary life. They share chocolate frogs, argue over whether to prioritize first-year safety drills or counter-propaganda workshops, and then, absurdly, drift into complaining about McGonagall's latest essay prompt. This isn't a story about choosing between war and adolescence. It's about being forced to hold both at once. Do you ever feel like Hermione starts, then stops, cheeks pink in the starlight? Like everyone decided the war ended because it was easier than asking why people like me were targeted in the first place? Harry watches her, the girl he loves, the witch they want erased, and he hears himself say, what if it never ended? What if Voldemort just went quiet and everyone pretended that was the same as winning? We're exploring that exact fracture, the difference between a defeated man and an undefeated ideology. Hermione can map the politics, chart the media narratives, quote the legal precedents that let former Death Eaters keep their fortunes. Harry can read the room at the Ministry, sense the way eyes slide off his scar, because there is no boy who lived myth to make this simple. And yet, they are still teenagers. They still laugh over an in-joke about Lockhart's signed portraits. They still lean shoulder to shoulder to quiz each other for exams. They still kiss, soft and lingering, and then pull back to argue about whether to recruit Zachariah Smith. Their bond is both battle plan and refuge, something more profound than either role alone. Downstairs in the castle, in a private staff room lit by low firelight, the Marauders sit together for the first time in weeks. James's hair is threaded with gray now. Sirius's jokes are edged with an exhaustion he can't quite hide. Remus's hands shake when he pours the tea. Peter watches all three with eyes that have seen too much and refused, again and again, to run. We've been here before, Remus says quietly. Meetings in back rooms. Concerned citizens forming committees. The prophet telling people to calm down. And kids in the middle, James adds, voice rough, are kids. Most importantly, they recognize the pattern, the slow normalization of cruelty, the way fear becomes background noise. They remember how long they waited, last time, before admitting it was a war. Do we have it in us to do this again? Sirius asks, not quite joking. They don't answer. They don't need to, because in that exact moment, a silver stag Patronus bursts through the wall, scattering firelight, James's own voice echoing back at him, urgent and shaking. Hogwarts, now. In the same breath, miles away, a new Prophet special edition slams onto breakfast tables, headline ink still wet, and somewhere in the castle, a scream rips through the Flu network as all the quiet, polite tension finally detonates off-page. The calm is over. The storm has arrived. Rewriting the legend. From boy who lived to family who chose the storm has arrived, but not the one the prophet promised. In canon, the legend is simple enough to fit on a chocolate frog card, a dark lord, a prophecy, a killing curse, a baby who survives. The boy who lived, clean, marketable. But what if the defining legend of this world is precisely that the nursery was never touched, the curse never cast, the betrayal never made? What if the most famous story people whisper about the Potters is the night nothing happened? We're exploring a timeline where the war doesn't end in a flash of green light over Godric's Hollow. Instead, it drags, recalibrates, mutates. The Potters stay hidden, the Marauders stay intact. Peter Pettigrew, the man canon tells us doomed them all, becomes the friend who held under pressure. And because there is no neat miracle, the wizarding world can't package its trauma into a single symbol. It has to remember choices. James refusing to abandon Peter, Peter refusing the Dark Mark, Lily refusing to let Dumbledore turn her son into a weapon. This isn't a story about fate choosing a child. This is a story about adults choosing differently and then having to live with the consequences every day after. Without the boy who lived myth, Harry grows up in something much messier and more human than legend. He is not a scar on a poster. He is a boy at the breakfast table, listening to half-finished order arguments, watching his parents argue with Dumbledore about the prophecy like it's a dangerous theory rather than holy scripture. At Hogwarts, he walks in not as a savior, but as James and Lily's son, Sirius's god godson, Remus's favorite pupil, a legacy, yes, but not an icon, and that changes his connection with Hermione completely. In canon, Hermione is drawn into the orbit of a myth. Here, she meets a boy who is brilliant at flying, terrible at essays without her, and actually allowed to be vulnerable because his parents are alive to see him break. Her own brilliance isn't cast in the shadow of destiny, it's recognized as something worth fighting for on its own terms. She isn't the clever one who helps the chosen one. She is the strategist James listens to, the researcher Lily invites for tea, the partner who stands beside Harry because they chose each other, not because the plot required it. Harry's internal script shifts from "I was chosen" to "I was raised." Raised by parents who argued with Dumbledore. Raised by a godfather who taught him that loyalty can rewrite prophecies. Raised by a quiet, relentless friend who became, slowly and then all at once, the love of his life. Their eventual romance doesn't feel like the universe paying him back for suffering. It feels like two people deliberately building a life together in the aftermath of their elders' decisions. Most importantly, the prophecy itself is reframed. It doesn't vanish. It lingers like a storm forecast that never quite hits, a warning about what could have been if one friend had broken. People still tell it in hushed tones, but as a near miss, not a script. Here is what almost happened when we let fear rule us. Here's how loyalty and love outmaneuvered inevitability. So the great legend of this era becomes the negative space, the attack that never came, the betrayal that never occurred, the fall that never happened. Children grow up asking, why didn't Voldemort strike that night? And the answers force them to talk about politics, about trust, about how fragile peace actually is. And if the legend is different, everything built on top of it must be different too. Ministries, schools, alliances, prejudices, all of it evolves in a world without a boy who lived, but with a family who stayed, and a friend who held the line. That's where Harry and Hermione step in together, not as relics of a prophecy, but as architects of what comes next. The question is, in a world without a single knight of destiny to hide behind, what kind of future do they dare to design? Harry and Hermione's love in a world without martyrs. So when we ask what kind of future they dare to design, we have to begin in the most ordinary place: a train compartment, a chocolate frog, a girl with too many books, and a boy who can actually talk about home. Hermione still walks the corridor looking for a seat. She still pushes open the door to find a skinny, dark-haired boy and a red-headed whirlwind. But this time, when she asks, "Have you really got an owl?" Harry doesn't flinch. He lights up. He tells her about letters from his mum, about Sirius's bad jokes, about a godfather who sends him advanced defense texts, just in case. The first connection between them isn't pity, it's curiosity. It's the shock of meeting someone her age, who has been loved loudly and hasn't learned to hide it. What if that's the first axis their bond tilts on? In canon, Hermione is drawn to the lonely boy under the legend. Here, there is no legend yet. No boy who lived, no whispered scar. This isn't a story about a girl orbiting a symbol. This is a story about a girl challenging a boy whose safety is real, whose privilege is tangible, and who will have to decide what to do with both. The troll still comes. The danger still feels horribly real. But when Harry and Ron run to that bathroom, Harry isn't trying to live up to a myth. He's living up to his parents, to Sirius, to the way they've taught him that fear is something you move through for the people who matter. Hermione's gratitude afterward is quieter, more analytical. She doesn't just say, "Friends?" She asks why he went back. She makes him articulate that courage is a choice, not a destiny stamped on his forehead. By the time Turner Year, that question has sunk in. We're exploring a timeline where their night of rescues and Patronuses isn't about proving Harry's chosenness. It's about proving they can choose each other. When he casts the stag and realizes he was always capable, Hermione is there, hand on his shoulder, not to tell him he's the chosen one, but to ask, "So what will you do with power you didn't earn, but still have?" Most importantly, there is no graveyard, no forced duel over a stolen childhood. The war simmers instead of explodes, so the dangers they face, escaped Death Eaters, cursed artifacts, ministry crackdowns, are things they walk into together, eyes open. Shared danger becomes shared decision. Trauma doesn't drag them into each other's arms. Conviction does. That's where Hermione's activism stops being a subplot and becomes the spine. Without the boy who lived myth sucking all the air out of the room, her campaigns for house elves, for muggle-born protections, for actual institutional reform are not side quests. They are the plot. Harry doesn't fall in love with the girl who saves his life. He falls in love with the girl who keeps asking who else deserves to be saved. And at home, that love is complicated by the fact that home exists. James watches the way Harry's eyes follow Hermione when she's pacing through an argument about Azkaban. Lily notices how Hermione never quite backs down from Dumbledore, even at Sunday dinner, even when Dumbledore raises an eyebrow and the room goes still. Imagine the awkwardness of bringing home the girl who will happily tell the greatest wizard of the age that his acceptable losses are unacceptable in front of your parents. In canon, the romance field is cluttered. Cho's grief, Ginny's crush, Ron's jealousy, a slow burn misalignment where timing always betrays them. Here, the clarity is slower, but cleaner. Fewer distractions, more late-night arguments in the library about what they owe a world that never crowned Harry. When they brush hands reaching for the same volume on magical law, it isn't because they're hiding from prophecy, it's because they're drafting alternatives. This isn't a story about trauma bonding. It's about two people who could, in theory, walk away, who could retreat into a quiet life with a safe house and a steady job, and who instead keep choosing each other, and the fight again and again. Their love is quieter without martyrdom pressing in on every side, but that quiet makes it stronger, more deliberate, something more profound than survival, which leaves us with the question that haunts every late-night conversation they share under the library lamps. If they are allowed to be partners instead of pieces on a chessboard, what do they actually decide to do with a world that still hasn't healed from a war it refuses to properly remember? And what happens when the world finally notices them noticing it? The Marauders' Second Chance, Sirius, Remus, and a Living Future. So what does that actually look like when the world finally notices, and the Marauders have to decide who they are now that they've survived? We're exploring a second chance that canon never allowed. Sirius Black is still the notorious Godfather, still the name whispered in corridors with a mix of awe and exasperation. He rides his flying motorbike over Quidditch matches. He crashes order meetings with reckless plans. He tells the same story about hexing Snape in 5th year like it's a Medal of Honor, but there's a difference now. Harry is not a distant symbol or a tragic echo of James. He's a teenager at the table, eyes sharp, voice steady, saying, "Padfoot, that was cruel." You know that, right? What happens when the boy you love like a son refuses to laugh at your worst memories? Sirius has to grow, not because Dumbledore lectures him, not because Azkaban broke him, but because Harry and Hermione hold up a mirror and don't blink. We'll examine the moments where Sirius teaches Harry how to take risks without turning people into collateral damage, late-night talks on the back porch, wand tips glowing, Sirius admitting that bravery without empathy is just a prettier word for bullying. Beside him, Remus is transformed not by tragedy, but by the absence of it. No shattered friend group, no 12 years of visiting a prison he can't afford to enter. With James and Lily alive, with Peter still at the kitchen table, Remus's employment is not a pity posting. He consults on curse theory. He writes quietly brilliant essays on werewolf rights that Hermione devours, and when he finally takes the defense post, it's not as a doomed cameo, it's as a long-term professor who has a home to return to. Most importantly, his role in Harry's life is not the tragic mentor who vanishes after 1 year. He is the steady presence who teaches Hermione how to fight institutions without losing herself, who tells her in hushed tones about ministry raids and Wolfsbane negotiations and what it costs to be right too early. And Peter, this isn't a story about a secret hero revealed at the 11th hour or a cartoon villain twirling his wand. This is a story about a man who came within a breath of betrayal and then didn't step over the line. He wakes up every day knowing Voldemort would still reward his defection. That fear will always whisper. He pours tea with shaking hands at Sunday dinners, while James jokes, Sirius laughs too loudly, and Remus watches him with quiet, relentless compassion. The fragile peace of this household hangs on his continued courage, and he knows it. Together, the four of them have to renegotiate their identities. They're no longer the boys who survived school and lost everything, they're the men who didn't lose it all and now have to live with the consequences. War stories at family dinners are told honestly, not mythologized. Harry and Hermione hear about the prophecy, about the Fidelius, about how close Peter came. They also hear the warning, history does not care that you survived once. So James and Lily model a marriage that is messy but enduring. Fights about order strategy, about parenting, about how much to tell the children, followed by apologies in the kitchen when they think no one is listening. Sirius shows Harry how to break rules without breaking people. Remus shows Hermione how to dissect laws and still remember the humans beneath the parchment. Peter, quietly, shows them what it means to live with temptation and not surrender. And because the Marauders are alive and involved, the next generation is not abandoned to prophecy and politics. They inherit love, they inherit a network. But they also inherit unfinished business, a war that never properly ended, and the knowledge that their choices will decide whether this second chance becomes something more profound than survival, or the prelude to a darker fall. A different war, a different world, politics without a boy who lived. So what does a second chance actually look like when it's not wrapped in a lightning bolt legend? When the war doesn't end with a baby in a crib, a Dark Lord in ashes, and a headline the Ministry can wave like a victory banner? In this timeline, the end of open conflict is not a clean break. It's a ceasefire negotiated in shadowed offices, a maze of pardons and quiet trials, a compromise between fear and fatigue. Without the boy who lived, there is no neat slogan, no poster child the minister can wheel out to reassure the public that good always triumphed and everything is fine now. There is only the record of who voted for which law, who looked away when Muggleborns disappeared, who funded which security measures that somehow always hurt the same people. The Ministry evolves, but it does so defensively, nervously, always with one eye on opinion polls and the other on the memory of masked figures in the sky. And Voldemort himself, he becomes less a bedtime boogeyman defeated by an infant and more a case study in systemic failure. We're exploring a world where his name is dissected in Wizengamot inquiries and Hogwarts lectures, not whispered in terror. What happens when blood purity rhetoric is allowed to root itself in school curricula? What if institutional cowardice lets a man like that rise twice? He is a cautionary tale about what happens when fear is treated as policy rather than as a warning. In the absence of a mythic savior, the power vacuum fills differently. Instead of everyone rallying around a scar, factions crystallize around principles. Those who want Aurors on every corner versus those who demand civil liberties. Those who cling to the statute of secrecy, like scripture, versus those who argue for controlled transparency with Muggle governments. Those who defend pureblood heritage versus those who push for deep reform. This isn't a story about one boy ending darkness. This is a story about arguments in committee rooms and walkouts in Diagon Alley, about politics as a battlefield where the casualties are slower, quieter, but no less real. Into that world steps Hermione Granger, not as the clever sidekick orbiting a legend, but as an architect. Spew is never a joke here. It's a Union drive. It's house elf testimonies recorded in the Prophet. It's quietly sympathetic goblins offering legal advice. It's Muggle-born protections, drafted with terrifying precision. She links werewolf rights to labor law, curriculum reform, to anti-radicalization. Most importantly, she refuses to let compassion be framed as naivete. Every petition, every march, every late-night strategy session in the Potter's kitchen is part of something more profound than teenage idealism. Harry's role shifts with that landscape. He's still a Potter, still the son of war heroes, but his power is relational, not prophetic. He uses his name to get Hermione into rooms she would otherwise be excluded from, then steps back and lets her arguments do the work. When he speaks, it's as a witness. This is what my parents saw. This is what they fought for. Not as a messiah, their bond becomes political as well as romantic. When courage meets brilliance, when trauma meets analysis, when love insists that safety without justice is not enough. And Dumbledore, without the halo of Guardian of the Chosen One, his compromises look harsher. Secret deals with former Death Eaters, half-truths about the prophecy, calculated risks with students' lives. Hermione reads the records, connects the dots, and refuses to file it all under necessary evil. We'll examine that confrontation soon, because it reshapes Hogwarts itself. James and Lily, who remember bodies in the street, lean toward stability. Harry and Hermione, raised in the uneasy peace that followed, lean toward change. That generational friction becomes the new engine of history. Family dinners that turn into policy debates, order reunions that feel like opposition meetings. And if there's no boy who lived to end the story, then the story doesn't end. It stretches forward into the unglamorous work of rebuilding. That is exactly where Harry and Hermione choose to stand, together, in the gray area where survival must finally be transformed into something worth fighting for. The question is, when that quiet revolution reaches Hogwarts itself, who stands with them, and who stands in their way? What this timeline reveals about destiny, choice, and love. So what are we actually looking at when that quiet revolution reaches Hogwarts? We're not just tweaking house points or class schedules, we're pulling on the first loose thread in the entire tapestry. What if Peter Pettigrew never betrayed the Potters, and the story stopped being about a boy marked by fate and started being about people marked by their decisions? In canon, Voldemort walks into Godric's Hollow like destiny on two legs. He has his prophecy, his target, his clean shot, the curse flies, the mark lands, the narrative locks into place, the boy who lived, the scar, the cupboard, the myth. But here, the Fidelius holds, Peter keeps the secret. Voldemort doesn't get his neat cinematic moment. The prophecy never fully activates, because the equal is never marked as his rival. Suddenly, destiny looks less like a script, and more like a weather forecast. Shifting pressures, dangerous, yes, but not inevitable. We're exploring what happens when the most important magic in the story isn't a killing curse rebounding in green light, but something quieter, almost disappointingly ordinary. A ratty, frightened man chooses not to run. A young couple in a hidden cottage keeps trusting their friends. Fear is resisted not in a dramatic battlefield, but in a kitchen over cold tea and whispered contingency plans. That's it. That's the divergence. And yet that one unbroken bond, that one moment where cowardice doesn't win, rewrites everything. This isn't a story about a messiah raised in misery, so he'll be ready to die on cue. This is a story about a boy who grows up loved, who walks into Hogwarts with both parents alive, with Sirius free, with Remus present, and has to ask himself, without the scar, without the legend, who am I? When he faces a still rising Voldemort, he can't hide behind, "I had no choice." Every stand he takes, against bigotry, against ministry denial, against the seduction of power, is a choice he owns. And because the world doesn't revolve around a chosen one, Hermione's center of gravity shifts too. In a war without a prophesied savior, the wizarding world suddenly, desperately needs thinkers, organizers, moral anchors. Hermione doesn't just help the hero with research, she co-authors the resistance. She designs the networks, questions Dumbledore, challenges James and Lily when they cling to old order tactics. Her brilliance isn't support, it's strategy. Her conscience isn't commentary, it's compass. Their love grows out of that shared agency. No one is rewarding Harry for suffering. No one is compensating Hermione for being overlooked. They look at a future no one scripted for them, a Voldemort who never fell, a ministry still rotting from within, and they choose each other as the person they want to face that uncertainty with. Love becomes a deliberate alignment of values. When courage meets intellect, when loyalty meets skepticism, when two people ask, again and again, what do we do now? And keep answering together. Look at the Marauders in this light. In canon, they are the generation that almost lost everything, frozen in betrayal and Azkaban and early graves. Harry's generation almost inherits nothing but trauma and legend. Here, both generations refuse those outcomes. James, Lily, Sirius, and Remus live long enough to admit their failures, to mentor without martyrdom. Harry and Hermione live deeply enough to refuse being defined by someone else's prophecy. If one cowardly choice could have created the canon we know, what can one courageous choice, on the page or in our own lives, still overturn? And when the next impossible decision arrives in this timeline, who will dare to make it? Your turn to choose, carrying the what if beyond the page. So where does that leave us? We've watched one trembling wand hand in a Godric's Hollow kitchen refuse to turn, and from that almost invisible act, an entire canon rearranged itself. Pettigrew doesn't betray, the Fidelius holds, the Potters survive. Voldemort's rise is blunted, not by a killing curse rebounding, but by a coward who, for once, chooses courage. There is no boy who lived headline, no baby with a scar to hang a legend on. The ministry never gets its convenient miracle. The prophet never prints its easy myth. Instead, the war cools into a dangerous stalemate, a world where Voldemort is thwarted, not vanquished, and where change has to come from ordinary witches and wizards who decide that this is just how it is no longer good enough. In that world, Harry grows up loved, not perfect, not untouched, but held. Hermione grows up heard, her questions treated as something more profound than a nuisance. The Marauders grow up at all. Sirius never rots in Azkaban, Remus never disappears into self-loathing, James and Lily never become portraits frozen in someone else's tragedy. When Harry and Hermione finally fall in love, they don't cling to each other as survivors of the same wound. They walk toward each other as two people who have learned, together, what it means to be brave on purpose. So what if this isn't a story about a prophecy fulfilled at all? What if this is a story about a prophecy outmaneuvered by loyalty, about a war quietly diffused by a choice that never makes the chocolate frog cards? We're exploring a universe where the great turning point is not a duel in a graveyard, but a rat who doesn't run. Most importantly, this isn't a story about surviving what was done to you. This is a story about what you do next, about who you stand beside when no one is watching, about who you dare to love when no prophecy is pointing an arrow at your chest. So sit with it for a moment. What does a wizarding world without a child hero have to learn the hard way? What happens when Hogwarts has no boy who lived, just a boy who studies, argues, plays Quidditch, and falls asleep in the library beside the girl who will one day change laws with him? What if our own world stopped waiting for chosen ones and started rewarding the Peters who don't betray, the Hermiones who don't back down, the quiet Harrys who choose to show up anyway? Here's where you come in. How do you write their 7th year? With Voldemort still dangerous but not omnipotent, with James and Lily in the stands at every match. How do you imagine their first tiny flat, half covered in parchment and half in Quidditch posters, their first major political fight when they realize love doesn't erase disagreement, it teaches you how to argue without leaving, and beyond that, where have you been told, in your own life, this is just how it is? What single different choice, refusing to laugh along, speaking up in a meeting, walking towards someone instead of away, might quietly reroute your narrative the way Peter's does here? So, as we close this chapter, we'll leave you with this. The night in Godric's Hollow stays quiet, the Potters sleep, Peter doesn't run, and somewhere, years later, in a sunlit Hogwarts library, Harry and Hermione look at each other and decide what happens now is up to them, and up to you.